Astel's married life ended in one day. From the age of 10, she worked hard to become a worthy wife of the Kaiser, but the only thing she got was the mark of an empress. The royal family had turned their backs on her, and the man she loved so much wanted Astel gone. 6 years later, when Astel and Kaiser were reunited again, she had to lie to her loved one. Astel was the favorite daughter of the Duke of Leston and former empress of the Lastiel Empire. She had probably the shortest marriage in history, lasting only one night. After the night with the crown prince, she became the #1 person discussed on every corner. And this popularity was very doubtful. She was considered a girl of easy virtue. The next morning, Crown Prince Kaiser informed her that the emperor had died and they could easily divorce. Just like that, without any explanation, they hinted to her that she was no longer needed here. Kazan still decided to clarify that he had no particular reason to marry her, and she, apparently, was not particularly blazing with real feelings for him. So it won't hurt anyone. Now there was only indifference in the guy's eyes. It turned out that they never burned with love for Astel, and he, it turns out, is also a manipulator and a deceiver. So he wrapped the girl around his finger. The girl's father, the Duke of Leston, was incredibly angry with the crown prince and called him a damn intriguer. How could he throw the young empress out of the palace in stasis after the wedding? It turned out that Kaiser's modesty was just a masterful performance for the public. And how can his poor daughter appear in society now? The secular world will no longer accept her. Astel knew that after their divorce, a kind of cleaning would begin. The emperor will get rid of unruly aristocrats like them. She knew this for sure. But on the other hand, divorce in the imperial family is quite difficult. And if you don't agree to it, then you can cause a bunch of different troubles for your vile hubby. The young empress did not listen to her father's plans. He, understandably, wants to protect his reputation. But she is not his helper in this. She will divorce Kaiser no matter what. The emperor has died, and now his son must take the throne by inheritance. And the father planned that Astel should rightfully become the empress. Her family will become even higher in status. It seemed that the father's rage would never end. He was ready to tear his hair out because his daughter decided to voluntarily leave the emperor's palace. And how will society react to this act? The last words of the Duke of Leston completely killed the girl's faith in parental love. Her father told her to get out of the house. He doesn't need a daughter who disgraces the whole family. But she didn't even show her disappointment in her own family. In the same calm voice, the girl replied that she would divorce the young emperor and leave her parental home. She seemed to love this childhood guy, and she absolutely did not care that the boy was the son of the emperor. Astel did everything to match her still friend and dreamed that in the future she would become his lover. She spent 10 long years trying to match Kaiser Lastiel. She was true perfection and a role model for all society ladies. That is why one day the emperor's young son gave her a blue moon. It was a necklace that was passed down to empresses from generation to generation. Astel did not even expect this herself, but she accepted the gift with great gratitude. Who, if not she, should have received this magical necklace? She began to live only for the sake of the young prince, constantly dreaming that he would truly fall in love with her. Astel had no time for rest and entertainment. She studied all the time to meet the status of the future empress. The girl studied politics, history, military art, literature, and much more. But if the humanities and exact sciences were easy for Astel, strict court etiquette took absolutely all her strength. She really disliked such activities. They were boring and completely stupid. It was a whole 10 years of constant work on myself, and all this work was done for only one purpose. She wanted to please the prince. I wanted his love and attention. But this was not the ending Astel expected. The man to whom she devoted her entire life simply offered to divorce her. So it was all a game on his part. Yes, she never told Kaiser how much she loved him. The girl thought that the crown prince understood everything without words. Her feelings and actions speak for them. But it turned out that the Kaiser did not see or feel. He decided that she never loved him. And what could poor Astel do in such a situation? The girl already realized that the young prince was just playing for the audience. He never loved her. Therefore, for the first time in her life, she lied. Astel confirmed that she did not love Kaiser. This was the lie he wanted to hear. The girl decided for herself that she would never regret this action in her life. It's not nice to beg for love from a young emperor, and she won't do that. No matter what happens, she will still be happy. We have evil for everyone, and especially for the Kaiser. But when examined by a doctor, she was told unexpected news. Astel is pregnant. But this did not stop Astel, but only gave her strength. She left home, divorced the emperor, and settled in a small town. The girl got a job at a local bakery. The work did not frighten her at all. On the contrary, it distracted her from difficult thoughts and sad memories. The owner of the bakery was pleased with such a worker. Sales increased significantly after the appearance of Astel. And Astel Leston didn't tell anyone that 6 years ago she gave birth to an amazing boy. The child became the meaning of her whole life. As best she could, she protected the baby from prying eyes, and absolutely no one in the world knew who his father was. It was a normal working day. The girl stood at the store window and saw a strange picture. Imperial knights walked around the square. They were all at the parade and seemed to be looking for someone. Astel understood everything from the first second. The knights definitely came for her. It was in vain that the girl thought that she had found the ideal place for a quiet life. They found her very quickly. First of all, the girl ran to her son's room. Theo was still sleeping soundly, but the noise woke him up. The boy looked at his mother with an uncomprehending look. She was very excited. Astel understood perfectly well that the emperor had eyes everywhere, but she hoped to hide from the past for as long as possible. It is clear that it will not be possible to hide the child forever, but she really hoped to live in peace for at least a little more time. There was a loud knock on the door. Astel reminded little Theo how he should behave in such cases. The boy nodded in agreement. He will have to pretend. Very quickly, the girl took out a small bottle of blue liquid from her pocket and dropped a few drops of the contents onto the boy's face. He understood why Mom was doing all this, so he stood at attention. Within a few minutes, knights appeared in the courtyard of her house. The warriors reported that His Majesty the Emperor had been looking for Lady Astel for a long time. They spent a lot of time and effort to find her. Astel understood that in such a situation it would be impossible to run away from the knights and hide somewhere. Moreover, she is not alone, but with a small child. So the girl took the boy in her arms and whispered not to worry. Well, after 6 long years, she will again have to meet the man whom she previously loved madly and with whom she gave birth to a child. This will be a very difficult meeting. She perfectly remembered this gloomy, huge building of the imperial castle. Nothing has changed here in 6 years. Everything is just as dull and gray. I didn't want to return to these walls at all. But Astel's opinions and desires were not asked, and now she is already inside the castle, accompanied by the Emperor's loyal knights. Theo looked fearfully from behind her at what was happening. The Emperor stood with his back to the guests and pretended to be carefully looking at the fire in the fireplace. But in fact, he did not know at all how to behave, so he simply waited for the right moment. Finally, he slowly turned to the girl. Kazan was still as handsome as he was 6 years ago. His eyes, slightly impudent and slanted, seemed to look straight into the soul. Astel shuddered, but did not show it. She tried her best to appear completely calm and indifferent. A lot of time passed. Feelings had to cool down. She had to forget everything. But pictures from the past treacherously began to emerge in my memory. She is head over heels in love with the young prince and naively thinks that he has reciprocal feelings. Standing in front of her was no longer a young guy, but an adult man. She loved him with all her heart and was ready to do anything to get even a drop of the same feelings from him. But I had to pull myself together and continue to play the role of an indifferent ex-wife. Astel bowed low and greeted His Majesty Kaiser Lastiel. It was in vain that the girl thought that she had no feelings left for this man. Despite his disgusting act, she still continued to think about him and believed that he was a good person. The Emperor hesitantly walked a little closer and examined Astel from head to toe. Then he cleared his throat and asked why she decided to hide. Was she afraid that he would pursue her to kill her? Suddenly, hearing the words behind her, little Theo sobbed. He was afraid that his mother might be harmed, and he would be left alone in this scary and cold place. Who is this gentleman anyway? Astel reflexively turned around and hugged the boy tightly. Then she gently stroked his head and tried to calm him down. Now is not the time to explain to your child what is happening. The Emperor in turn looked carefully at the frightened boy. He was handsome, and in his eyes, in addition to fear, curiosity shone. Kaiser asked who this child was and why Astel brought him. The girl understood perfectly well that this moment had to come someday and was mentally preparing for it. But now she just hugged the child tighter and was silent. 6 years ago, the Kaiser ascended the throne and took the place of emperor. He began harsh reforms and eradicated all unwanted nobles. Everyone who rebelled was destroyed. But the uprisings were not in vain. The empire was divided into two camps. One of them included young nobles. The other was led by old aristocrats who were opposed to the emperor. By a terrible coincidence, it was Astel's father, the Duke of Leston, who led the opposition and hostile faction of aristocrats. He tried with all his might to overthrow the emperor. The girl deliberately hid her son. She was afraid that the child could become a real influential tool in the war if the aristocrats, or the emperor himself, found out about him. The love of her life, Kaiser, was taken from her, and if someone dared to take Astel's child away, she simply could not stand it. The meaning of her existence on this earth would simply disappear. Therefore, Astel made a wise decision and fled the capital in time. No one noticed her pregnancy and therefore could not even imagine that the girl had a 6-year-old child. Astel must hide her son as best and as long as possible. Otherwise, she could definitely lose him. Therefore, you should be extremely careful and prudent. It was necessary to answer the emperor's question, so the girl blurted out the first thing that came to her mind. And the excuse that came to mind was that it was her nephew. The Kaiser thought for a moment and then began to think out loud. It seems Brother Astel was not in a relationship or married. He generally led a reclusive life and was afraid of society. I had to come up with a plausible story on the spot. This is not the son of her own brother, but of Sigmund, a cousin on her mother's side. Now she is looking after the child. That's right, he remembered. His ex-wife had a cousin, Sigmund, heir to the Kallenberg family who died during the war. So this is his son. But why is Astel raising him? It turned out that Sigmund had an affair with the maid of their estate. She bore him a son, whom the guy planned to make his heir. But he didn't have time, because he died in the war. Astel's maternal grandfather, Marcus Kallenberg, sent the result of a relationship test in order to accept this child. And so it turned out that the boy is the successor of the Leston family. To prevent the emperor from guessing about the deception, the girl dropped special drops into the child's eyes, which changed the color of the iris. Kaiser's was reddish in color, and Theo's was now bright blue. After the girl found out that her only night with the Kaiser was fatal and she became pregnant, Astel went to the outskirts of the empire to visit her maternal grandfather. The man lived quite modestly, did not even keep a servant. Therefore, it was an ideal place to temporarily hide from the Kaiser's people and give birth to a child in calm conditions. However, there was one nuance that got in the way. All members of the imperial family and their heirs had special eyes. Their irises were red, and the child, Astel's eyes were also red. But the girl was lucky. She met a young pharmacist in the vicinity of her grandfather's house. She helped Astel and developed special drops that could change eye color. Now they were very useful. Astel kept this single bottle of blue liquid until the right moment, and now it has come. The girl mentally thanked her friend and higher powers for having managed to use the drug. She and the boy had an agreement. If she touches Theo's little finger, they start a game, and he must call her Aunt Astel. Right now, the girl was tightly squeezing the boy's finger. The girl was an excellent strategist, so she thought through everything to the smallest detail. She taught Theo what to say to strangers and in what situations. They even practiced several times. In order not to harm the child and keep him with her, Astel did everything that depended on her, and now we could only hope that the Kaiser would not ask the boy and her unnecessary questions. Astel decided to take the lead and began to tell her that she was taking care of the child, since the boy had no one else left than her and his grandfather. And Marcus Kallenberg is too old to take care of children. The young emperor listened carefully to the explanation and nodded his head affirmatively. He was more than satisfied with this information. Everything seems logical. At this age, the Duke will not be able to take care of his great-grandson. The Kaiser then said that he had recently visited the old Duke. He was looking for Astel there. But Marcus said that even under torture, he would not tell the emperor where his granddaughter was. At that moment, the girl just wanted to kill this abnormal person on the spot. How could he break into her grandfather's house and threaten him? What did he even do with the old man? Is he even alive? But the emperor calmed her down. Her grandfather is fine. He is alive and more than healthy. Now she is at the Dench residence in excellent conditions and enjoys all the delights of life. The boy did not let go of Astel's hand. Theo was afraid that he might miss some sign from her and cause harm. He understood that the situation was tense now by the way the girl nervously squeezed his fingers. Astel began to think that the emperor was beginning to guess something. He looked strangely, first at her, then at the boy, and then he asked to talk in private, without prying eyes and ears, that is, without Theo. It was clear that the Kaiser was trying to separate the girl and the child. She leaned over to the boy and tried to calm him down. Everything will be fine. He needs to wait a little for her in the next room. Before releasing the boy, she squeezed his little finger one more time. He understood everything and smiled widely. Then he said that Aunt Estelle need not worry about him. He is already big and will sit quietly. One of the knights took the boy by the hand and led him into the next room. Estelle looked at him with a frightened look and tried to even out her breathing. The decisive moment is coming. The emperor invited the girl into his office and sat her down at the table. She remembered this room very well. It was here that their last conversation took place. Some kind of déjà vu is happening to her now. The Kaiser himself took a cup and poured hot tea into it, the one she loved when she still lived here. The guy said that it was still too cold in these parts, and the girl needed to warm up. She looked at the cup. Indeed, this is her favorite tea. Does he really remember and is now using it on purpose? Or maybe it's just a coincidence. Astel said that she would like to hear the reason why she was so eagerly sought throughout the empire. The guy replied that it was all about his grandmother, Empress Dowager. She heard that the woman had recently passed away. It must be very difficult for Kaiser now because he was very close to his grandmother. The Kaiser's mother died very early, and the boy was raised by Her Majesty Dowager. The Kaiser said that the grandmother was the heiress of the Duke of Milan in the southern territories. To return the lands to the imperial family, her grandfather forced her to marry him. It was a terribly stupid and outdated method, but he was still acting. Be that as it may, but now after the death of Empress Dowager, all her property should go to the imperial family. But the whole point is that the emperor's grandmother left a strange will before her death. It was because of him that the Kaiser had to find Astel and return her to his castle. The old empress stated the latter in her will. She orders that nothing related to the southern lands can be decided without the approval of Empress Astel von Lesten. There he was, and Astel already thought for a second that the Kaiser still had tender feelings for her. But no, this man is simply a calculating and pragmatic strategist who has no feelings. This is exactly what he looked like now. Direct, slightly boring, and thoughtful look. He looked at the girl, and it was impossible to read on his face what he was really thinking about. This scared Astel a little, and even more alarming. As Astel thought, Kaiser is just cold calculation, business, and no emotions. The emperor invited the girl to go with him to the northern capital. A mansion will be built for her there, and then he will immediately be able to transfer the southern territories to his family. She understood how important these southern lands were for the Kaiser. Right now, senior nobles are fighting for this territory, and it is important not to give it away. But now she categorically said that she did not want to go to the northern capital. The guy frowned and prepared for a difficult conversation, but Astel said she didn't refuse, she just didn't want to do it under such conditions. Can't the emperor change the terms of his will? She was not interested in lands. Why, instead of territories, try to return her grandfather a decent pension so that he can spend his old age comfortably. He fully deserved it during his career. And then came a proposal that the Kaiser did not expect at all. Astel continued. Secondly, why doesn't the emperor return the eastern lands to her family as soon as the will comes into force? The guy exhaled noisily. Why does she need this? Why is she doing this? He offers her a wonderful place in the capital and a lot of money. Why is she trying to do things her own way now? That's not why he was looking for her so much. The emperor went on to say that his own grandmother probably loved Astel more than her grandson. She took care of the girl and wrote her into her will. No one was so upset when the young empress left the castle. Empress Dowager quite sincerely bequeathed most of the lands to her because she trusted the girl and considered her an honest and reliable half of the Kaiser. Why is Astel now trying to ignore the woman's request? The girl decided to remind the emperor that she was the only empress on the entire continent who was stripped of her title immediately after her wedding night. On top of all this, even her own family rejected her because of the Kaiser. How he imagines her return to the imperial castle in the capital. If she appears in secular society, then obviously people will discuss her return. Gossip will begin. The imperial family will be the center of attention. It was so good to live with my grandfather in the village. It was calm there, very few people. No one cared about her personal life. The girl calmly walked down the street with Theo, and it never occurred to anyone to ask where his father was. But in the capital, everything is different. It's very dangerous here. And if people find out that she has returned to the imperial palace, then Theo will have to be taken there. Everyone will begin to be interested in the only question: who is this boy? If the emperor returned the payments and lands to grandfather, then they would have enough money to go somewhere far away from the capital. The three of them will begin a quiet and peaceful life. The guy listened calmly enough to the girl's proposal. After thinking a little, he replied that her conditions suited him. But it was the Kaiser's turn to voice his counter-proposal. Until everything is over, the girl must under no circumstances run away. He will arrange all the conditions for her so that Astel and her nephew feel comfortable and safe. He won't bother her, only in the case of a will matter. There was a moment of silence, and everyone thought about their own. The girl thought that she could refuse anyone, but not this person. Love still lived deep in my soul. Therefore, she promised the emperor that she would not run away from the capital. They agreed on everything, and within a few hours the imperial carriage was rushing Astel and the child to a remote castle, where she was supposed to live temporarily. The Kaiser really took care of everything. As soon as they got into the carriage, Theo immediately fell asleep on her lap, and Astel quietly took out a small bottle of blue liquid from her pocket. Only half of the contents remained in it. The potion that changed the color of the eyes should never be lost. She sold all her possessions to find him. He and his friend tried many times to prolong the effect of this drug, but nothing worked. The liquid perfectly changed the color of the boy's eyes, but unfortunately it only worked for half a day. But Astel sincerely hoped that this time would be enough to get to her destination. Not only Theo was exhausted by the road, Astel was also very tired. Finally, the carriage stopped, and the knight accompanying it announced that they had arrived at the castle of Mayern. They can go out and stay in the house. This young man was familiar to her. It was Sir Linden. Now he was appointed head of the knightly guard. It was to this man that Kaiser entrusted his ex-wife and her nephew. Astel was very happy that she saw a familiar person. Sir Linden was always kind to the girl. Now the man also recognized his former mistress and expressed his greetings to the former empress. But their conversation was unexpectedly interrupted by the emperor himself. The Kaiser appeared out of nowhere. Astel even shuddered at the sight of him. The man was thoughtful and very serious. He hinted that there was no point in chatting. It was time to go into the house. The wide gates opened, and the emperor was the first to enter the castle grounds. He was followed by Astel with the boy and the staff accompanying them. Suddenly, the sound of fast steps approaching was heard. These were women's steps. And finally, a beautiful girl with long red hair appeared around the corner. She ran straight to the emperor with open arms and a wide smile. Approaching the Kaiser, she demonstratively placed her hand on his chest so that everyone could see, and greeted His Majesty. Then she said that she missed her very much and was looking forward to their meeting. Astel stood in complete confusion. She did not know who this young lady was and what her relationship was with the emperor. Perhaps this is his new lover. After all, 6 long years have passed. The Kaiser could even marry a second time. And only after a few minutes and coming out of a complete stupor, Astel remembered who this girl was. It was Lady Marianne Crouch. She knew her father, and met Marianne herself at several social events. Lady Marianne's father, Earl Crouch, was at this time a very famous person in the country. He belonged to the imperial faction and was an excellent politician. But why is the girl here? A young man ran up to the guests. He was slightly excited and was breathing heavily from a long run. Finally stopping, he apologized for his lateness and greeted those present. It was the emperor's secretary, Cloud Balian. The guy approached Astel and bowed to her, calling her Lady Leston. And then Marianne remembered who this woman was. She is the emperor's ex-wife. They somehow divorced strangely, or this woman left him, but Marianne no longer liked her. Be that as it may, Marianne felt uneasy that the emperor had called her to the castle again. Why is she here? Does he have renewed feelings for this little bastard again? What did the Kaiser even see in her? The girl had more questions. Where did this hillbilly get a small child? Is this her son or some relative? And why does the boy receive so much attention from the emperor, the chief of security, and even the secretary? Cloud Balian invited Astel and the little guest to go with him inside the house. He will show them their room and everything they need. They were probably tired from the journey, especially the little gentleman. They need some rest. Finally, little Theo waved his hand to Marianne and suggested that they would meet again. But the girl didn't think so. She had already begun to dream that these guests would leave this house as soon as possible and leave the emperor alone. The girl was happy even with little things. Now she was finally alone with Kaiser and was incredibly happy about it. Let this hillbilly finally understand that the emperor does not need her, he remains with Marianne. Now she had the perfect moment to be alone with this man. Marianne rejoiced in her heart. She had liked the Kaiser for a long time. Besides, he is lonely now. You can try to attract his attention. His Majesty's secretary saw that for some reason the girl became very sad and thoughtful. This happened immediately after the conversation with Lady Marianne. He realized that nothing had been explained to her yet. Astel realized that from the outside she probably seemed a little strange, so she told Cloud that she did not want to upset Lady Marianne, because the Emperor clearly liked this girl. She will ask for forgiveness when the opportunity arises. His Majesty's secretary immediately smiled and said that there had been a stupid misunderstanding. Madame Mariana and the Emperor have a completely different relationship than Estelle thought. Everything is much simpler. Then the guy led them to one of the many doors and opened it. Astel gasped in delight. The room was simply luxurious, everything sparkled with gold, and the sizes were simply enormous. The Emperor really took care of her comfort. As if at the snap of a finger, 3 maids appeared in the chambers right out of nowhere. They welcomed Lady Estelle to the castle and said that they were ready to fulfill any of her requests at any time of the day or night. The secretary explained that they would remain in the castle for 2 days. He thought that Lady Askel and her little nephew might need help. Therefore, the guy decided to assign 3 maids to his dear guests at once. The boy had been silent until this moment, but now he opened his mouth wide in surprise. He had never had a personal servant before, and indeed there were never any servants in their house. So Theo politely thanked the guy. The Emperor's secretary asked Astel to talk a little privately, so they sat on the terrace, and little Theo was sent into the garden to watch the butterflies that flew over the rose bushes. Cloudbellion decided not to hide anything. This will make it easier to explain the situation. In 2 days they will arrive in the capital. But at the request of the Emperor, the contents of the will that the late Empress left must remain secret. Well, here it begins, the girl thought. She asked a logical question. Why all this conspiracy? Because the will was drawn up by the Empress. It is an absolutely legal document. The guy replied that this way they could avoid many problems. One of the main problems was that Empress Dowager had actually passed away 3 months ago. If it turns out that the inheritance matter has not yet been resolved, then unnecessary questions will begin from the opposition party. The girl thought about it. It was not difficult to guess that the senior nobles would begin to weave intrigues and make plans to overthrow the ruler. And the lords of the southern lands will definitely be unhappy with this turn of events. Cloudbellion smiled bitterly, and the girl realized that he was really worried about his master. He reported that the Emperor had recently suppressed an uprising in the north of the country. Therefore, I would not want to encounter something like this again. Astel felt very bad at heart. She could become the cause of a new uprising in the south of the country, without wanting it at all. These areas of the country have always been calm. But small things sometimes become terrible triggers. How are they going to hide such an important state matter? When Empress Dowager's will is announced, attention will still be paid to her. Whatever one may say, neither she nor the Emperor can avoid this. We must not forget her father, who will benefit from this situation and will definitely take advantage of the moment to harm Kaiser. And she wouldn't want that. Now she looks like a smart but very pathetic girl. There is probably no need to show that she knows a lot and understands the full depth of the situation. You need to pretend to be stupid, but you also can't let yourself be taken advantage of. The Emperor's secretary really hoped for cooperation, but it was time for him to leave. There was a lot to do. Therefore, the guy bowed and, citing being busy, said goodbye to Astel. Meanwhile, Marianne was furious. She felt like she lost her place on the first day. The Emperor's ex-wife is not a simpleton at all. The daughter of the Duke of Leston should not be underestimated. While Astel was talking with the Emperor's secretary, little Thea was playing in the garden. He had already managed to see all the beautiful butterflies on the flowers. And now I saw a beautiful plant. It was not like all the others. The boy immediately extended his hands to him. The boy could not know that this grass is poisonous. He was just interested in touching the stems. Fortunately, Astel saw this and arrived in time to her son. Otherwise, there would be trouble. She picked it up and explained that no one had lived in this castle for a long time, so there were a lot of weeds in the garden, including poisonous plants. From now on, the boy promised to be more careful. Then the girl had to tell that they were in the emperor's house, and that gloomy and formidable man is the ruler of the country. For now, Theo must remember to call her mom when there are strangers around. As the boy did not ask why they were doing all this, Astel decided not to reveal all her cards to the child yet. They play this game until they return to their home, and then they have to cope. Much to Astel's surprise, Theo was already behaving perfectly and had not yet caused any problems. He did better than the girl expected, and so far, no one knows what the emperor is. For some reason, Astel remembered that on their only night, Kaiser took a birth control pill. He said then that he didn't want to burden her. From the outside, it looked like caring about the girl. Astel had not yet reached her room when gossip began to haunt her. The maids whispered behind their backs and discussed various reasons why the girl returned. She probably wants to seduce the emperor. The stupid girls didn't even see Kaiser's ex-wife enter the room. She heard everything but decided not to start a scandal. Besides, Theo was with her, and swearing in front of a child is not the best example to follow. So the guest pretended that everything was fine and asked if the bath was ready for the boy. He was very tired on the road, and now they must take care of him. But the maid stood rooted to the spot from fear. Without unnecessary emotions, Astel asked again whether the maids had collected water for her little companion. Then she herself stated the fact that the maids had failed to comply with the request and silently headed to the front door. The boy was waiting for her outside the door. She told the baby that she would bring him a change of clothes and he should wait for her. Theo nodded and said that he was not going to run away from here because he really liked the house. One of the maids ran up to the girl and began to ask for forgiveness. She understood that the lady had heard everything and could now complain to the emperor. Astel actually hinted that she wasn't going to just leave it like that. She asked the three gossips to go immediately to the butler and tell him everything that they had just discussed behind her back. And let her and her son be assigned new maids, not so talkative and inquisitive. In front of the child, she will not allow anyone to talk about such things. She doesn't care what people talk about her behind her back, but Theo shouldn't hear talk about her relationship with the emperor. No matter how much the maids cried and asked for forgiveness, the girl was adamant. As it turned out, she was not such a simpleton and knew how to stand up for herself and for this strange nephew who came from nowhere. Astel walked nervously around the room. She was waiting for a new servant who would suit her, and there was a soft knock on the door. The girl thought that the butler worked very quickly and found new maids for her. The house manager actually appeared in the doorway. The man bowed low and asked permission to enter. Several servants came in behind him and brought a bunch of gift boxes. When asked what this all meant, the man replied that His Majesty had sent her all these gifts. He made sure that Astel and her little companion had everything they needed. The gift boxes contained jewelry, expensive clothes, toys for Theo, and a bunch of different things. But Astel asked the man to return all this to His Majesty, because she did not need anything from the emperor. The butler tried to explain everything again. It turns out that the emperor is inviting Lady Astel to dinner this evening. That's why he sent all these gifts so that the girl could feel comfortable in this environment. Astel thought about it. Why all this window dressing? They cannot see each other, and it is unpleasant for them to be together in the same room. So why is he organizing this dinner? You can talk about business without officialdom. Astel was afraid. She did not yet understand what game the emperor had started and what role was assigned to her. Therefore, you need to think carefully about everything and get ready for dinner with the Kaiser. Meanwhile, in the emperor's office, Secretary Cloudbellion was making a report. He gave His Majesty the documents, which indicated that Astel's father, Duke of Leston, had begun to act. But he does it very carefully. The Kaiser read the documents carefully again. It was clear that the Duke was going to leave the capital in the near future. We need to buy some time. Then the opponent will drive himself into a trap. The Duke of Lestang was a famous and influential man. In addition, the man was very smart and quite cunning. It was the most difficult thing with him. He always acted thoughtfully and carefully. There was a knock on the office door and a butler appeared in the office. The man must have come to talk about gifts. And this was true. The emperor, to be honest, was waiting for news. I wonder how Astel reacted to this. The butler reported that Lady Astel had refused dinner. She explains this by saying that she constantly has to look after her nephew and cannot be away. And since she doesn't go to dinner, she returns the gifts. The house manager also noticed to himself that the emperor was behaving at least strangely. For 6 long years, he did not even allow a single woman to approach him. And then he takes and gives gifts to his ex-wife, from whom he divorced a long time ago. The butler also said that the girl asked the emperor to forgive her. It's just that the child is still too small, and she constantly looks after her nephew during meals. That's the whole reason why Astel refuses to have dinner together. The secretary added that Astel could not leave him under the care of the maids. The whole point is that the girl does not trust the first people she meets, and there was not enough time to instruct new staff. But the emperor, it turned out, had a solution to this problem. If she can't leave her nephew to the maids, then let her take him with her to dinner. It will be even better if they come together. The secretary and butler breathed a sigh of relief in unison. The emperor solved a problem in a few minutes that the two of them could not solve for half a day. It would be great if Kaiser got to know his ex-wife's nephew better. And within a few hours the dinner party began, which was attended by Astel and Theo, as well as Lady Mariana and the emperor's secretary, Cloud Bellman. At the beginning of the feast, the atmosphere was slightly tense. Little Theo asked Astel to let him take his teddy bear Levin to the table. The girl allowed it, but now asked the boy to put the toy away while he was at the table eating. The girl understood perfectly well that it was impossible to refuse the emperor twice, so when he offered to take his nephew with him to dinner, she decided to agree. The Kaiser sat with an inscrutable expression. It was interesting what he was thinking about at this moment. Lady Marianne seemed very prepared for this dinner. She put on the most beautiful dress and the most expensive jewelry. The girl probably desperately wanted to please the emperor. Marianne Crouch tried with all her might to attract the Kaiser's attention. She laughed a lot, joked, and remembered last year when she won the Queen of Autumn competition. The girl considered this her great achievement. Theo asked his mother to explain who the Queen of Autumn was. Tara said that in the capital hunting competitions are held every autumn, and one of the girls must be chosen as the queen of this holiday. Last year it was Lady Marianne. The guest chuckled angrily. How can this boy not know about hunting competitions? Did his family never participate in such events? This means he has a bad upbringing and no one is involved in the development of this child. But Theo was not a timid person. The boy very politely answered Mariana that he did not know about such competitions, only for the reason that such events were not held in the east of the country. Besides, he is still too young to visit them. The emperor's secretary entered the conversation. The guy suggested that Lady Astel knew much more about this type of entertainment. She definitely attended hunting competitions and can tell many interesting stories from the past. Astel confirmed that she attended such events, and they were quite interesting, especially in the year when His Majesty the Emperor turned 17 years old. At that time, the competition was truly magnificent because the Crown Prince became the winner. She remembered perfectly that day 9 years ago. She and other young girls sat in the front row and watched the competition. It was terribly boring, and Astel dreamed that this performance would end as soon as possible. She really wanted to see the Crown Prince. And Kaiser promised her that he would catch the best prey and would definitely become the winner. She just needs to wait until the competition is over. He jumped on his horse, took his bow, and rode into the forest. She could only hope that he would return soon. Indeed, the hunt turned out to be very successful for the Crown Prince. He managed to shoot a huge deer. The Kaiser's assistants praised him and suggested he return to the castle. He will definitely have the best booty among all the participants. But the young man did not listen to them. He decided to hunt some more, and within a few minutes I came across an unusually large deer with interesting yellowish fur. This will be the booty. The Crown Prince shouted that he must definitely catch this animal. He jumped back onto his horse and drew his bow. The arrow flew out, but as it turned out later, the guy missed, and the deer began to run away. The Crown Prince decided to catch up with the wounded animal at any cost, and after a few minutes he bent over the deer and decided to kill it with a dagger. But suddenly a rustling sound was heard from behind the bushes. Looking up, Kaiser saw a man who also had a bow in his hands. It was the Duke of Leston himself. The man smiled unpleasantly and looked appraisingly at the prince's crown. The Kaiser met the Duke's hard gaze. Then he asked the man if he had wounded the deer, because the Crown Prince had also shot it with a bow. Kaiser's guards came running to the voices and asked what happened. The guy answered coldly that everything was absolutely fine. It turned out that he and the Duke were hunting for the same prey, so now they decided to talk. The question of who killed this deer needs to be resolved. As a result of the competition, it was determined that the Crown Prince brought the best booty and is the winner this year. The Emperor rewarded his son and the guy bowed his head before the ruler of his country. Astel was delighted with the ending of this holiday. The whole day the girl did nothing but wait for the end of these stupid competitions, during which innocent animals are killed. But her Kaiser was amazing. The crown prince had to, as the winner, choose the Queen of Autumn for himself and put a special wreath on her head. And Kaiser, naturally, took it and headed towards Astel to put it on the girl. He actually put a wreath on Astel's head, but in the guy's eyes there was no love, no admiration, nothing like that at all. He congratulated the girl on the title, and then said that he was very tired during the hunt, turned around, and left. These memories were boring and depressing for her, and she didn't want anyone to remind her of this day. Then 9 years ago, she stood in the middle of the yard with a wreath on her head and really wanted to cry. Therefore, the girl decided not to delve into the past. She said she didn't remember anything else interesting about that day. I urgently needed to change the topic of conversation and try to somehow cheer myself up. The secretary saw that the emperor's ex-wife tensed slightly from the memories and lost her mood. Therefore, the guy decided to change the topic of conversation. He recalled that hunting is now prohibited, as there are too many bears in the forests, and it is dangerous. Having heard about the bears, Theo became very interested and decided to ask again. He loved these animals very much, and dreamed of seeing a live bear at least once. They must be huge and strong. The butler approached the table and quietly said something to the emperor. The man immediately frowned and stood up from the table. The Kaiser thanked everyone for sharing the dinner and said that he had to go away on business. Marianne also stood up and announced that she was also leaving. She looked at the guests dismissively once again and hinted to Astel that before taking a child to such gatherings, you first need to teach him manners. She added that it is quite difficult to cope with other people's children who do not have parents, and she wasn't talking about Theo at all. Marianne knew very well that Astel grew up without a mother. But the girl decided not to offend either herself or her Theo. Therefore, Astel replied to Marianne that she was happy for her to have a complete family. But Lady Crouch now behaves the way children spoiled by rich parents behave. And Astel decided to remind this self-confident boor that the emperor himself lost his mother at a very early age. Therefore, Marianne's words would have offended the Kaiser himself. Fortunately, he does not hear them. After that, Astel decided that she had had enough for today. Therefore, she politely thanked everyone for the company and the delicious dinner, took Theo's hand, and said goodbye, leaving the angry and humiliated Marianne in the company of the emperor's secretary. The frustrated girl clenched her fists tightly. Marianne lost this fight. This is not how she imagined tonight. She had plans to show this village guest how well she got along with the emperor. But it didn't work out at all according to plan. It was a shame that Astel appeared here. Does she really want the Kaiser back? But Marianne will not allow this for anything. She will not allow the emperor to be distracted by all sorts of girls from the backwoods. Already in bed and falling asleep, Theo remembered that he had forgotten his teddy bear in the dining room at dinner, and without it, he won't be able to sleep. And Astel calmed the child down and said that she would come down and bring the bear. The girl quietly went down to the dining room, but suddenly I saw 2 silhouettes at the end of the corridor. People were talking in whispers, clearly hiding from prying eyes and ears. But Astel noticed them. The girl quietly crept closer, trying not to let anyone see her. She managed to see the silhouette of the emperor in the twilight. He was actively explaining something to his interlocutor. From the snatches of phrases that Astel was able to hear, it was clear that they were talking about government affairs. The secret stranger said that the count asked to be told that the spider was caught in the false nets that had been placed. After the stranger disappeared, the emperor stood in silence for some time. For some reason, it seemed to him that there was someone else in the corridor besides him, watching him closely. He could not be fooled in such matters, so he sharply turned the corner and ran straight into his ex-wife. Astel shuddered in surprise and almost dropped the candle from her hands. The man took her hand. The girl immediately decided to justify herself. She said that Theo forgot a toy in the dining room, and she just went down to pick up the bear. She assured the emperor that she had not seen or heard anything. The Kaiser clenched his fists nervously. Why does Astel behave this way? She is not a servant, but the former wife of the emperor. Why is he afraid to raise his head and look him straight in the eyes? The young emperor's nerves could not stand it. He asked her to raise her head and behave appropriately. She shouldn't apologize or humiliate herself. Astel is here as a dear and respected guest. The girl followed the Kaiser's order and looked the man straight in the eyes. Does the emperor really feel guilty? He behaves really strangely. He invited me to dinner, gave expensive gifts, and then ignored me the whole evening. And the girl decided to dot the I's and dot the I's right away. If His Majesty plans to take care of her and her nephew all the way, then it is better not to do so. And there is no need to feel guilty either. Astel has no regrets towards the emperor. Then the girl decided to say goodbye. She understood that their nightly conversation would lead nowhere. Therefore, Astel said that her nephew would not be able to sleep without her, and she needed to go to the child's bedroom. The Kaiser was left alone in the middle of the corridor. All thoughts were confused in his head. For some reason, pictures from the past flashed before his eyes, where he puts the wreath of the Queen of Autumn on the head of young Astel. Then he also acted like a real scoundrel and abandoned the girl in the middle of the holiday. When Astel returned to her room, she immediately decided to check if the drops that change eye color were in place. They were in a box under lock and key. But when the box was delivered, the girl saw that it was being opened. Nothing was stolen, but something may have been put inside. Over tea in the morning, the emperor's secretary announced that due to bad weather, their further trip was being postponed. Because of the storm, the emperor decided to postpone his departure for the safety of Astel and her little companion. The girl was a little worried. She was supposed to see her grandfather at Den's castle today. But it looks like plans will change. She should at least write a letter to grandfather and inform her about the delay, because the old man might be worried. The secretary understood everything and said that Aston could write a letter to his relative and give it to him. Next, Cloud will make sure that the envelope gets into the hands of the Duchess's grandfather as quickly as possible. Then the young man warned the girl that all outgoing correspondence was being checked. He asked permission to open the letter addressed to Lady Estelle's grandfather and read it. These are the rules of the emperor. At the same time, the emperor's secretary smiled very strangely and behaved in an unnatural way. Astel immediately realized that the guy was blatantly lying. The emperor could not give such an order. The Kaiser could not do this to her. There was nothing to do, and Astel decided to play along with the young man. And she pretended to be stupid and told us that she allowed the secretary to read her letter. She's not going to hide anything from the emperor and only warns her grandfather about the delay. Cloud Bellion opened the envelope and ran his eyes along the lines. There really was nothing interesting or important in the letter. The granddaughter told her grandfather about her successes, work, and that she would arrive a little later than the appointed time. Then Astel asked her grandfather about his chronic illnesses and wondered how he felt in an unfamiliar place. She asked the man to rest often and take full care of his health. The secretary was even a little disappointed. Everything is so banal and simple. The Marquis is sick. Sometimes he feels bad because of his age. And his granddaughter is worried about his health. The situation is extreme sleep. There was nothing to be done. He thanked the girl for allowing her to check the letter and promised to send it to Grandfather Estelle as soon as possible. The emperor's ex-wife did not show that she guessed the secretary's true motives. An ordinary letter with nothing suspicious in it. This is exactly what it should look like. But grandfather is a smart person and will definitely understand the real content of the text. Now Astel needs to be extremely careful and act cunningly and calmly. This is necessary so that her family can be reunited again. But she must not make a single mistake. The only problem left to solve is... Therefore, the next day, Astel sought out the head of security, Sir Linden. The girl asked the young man for help. But to do this, Linden had to go into her room. There, Astel showed the young man her box. The girl wondered if it was possible to find out whether anyone had opened this box in the last 24 hours. It is very important for her to find out the truth, because it seems to her that strangers discovered it. The maids immediately came under suspicion. All of them were summoned for questioning, but the girls claimed that they were forbidden to touch the personal belongings of their owners under any pretext. Cool Down nodded her head in agreement. She thought so too. But the girl has no doubt that someone either opened her box or tried to open it, but the villain failed. Sir Linden confirmed that no one except the servants entered Mrs. Leston's chambers. Therefore, suspicion falls specifically on the maids. This has already been checked and confirmed by security. Therefore, maids should think carefully before answering questions. One of the maids tried to explain that they had indeed entered Lady Astel's chambers, but only to clean up. If they wanted to steal something, they would not open the box twice, but would simply take it. But the emperor's ex-wife was adamant. She said she would have believed the girls if the real goal was to steal. Criminals know that there is nothing there to steal. So the goal was something else, but definitely not theft. That is why the girl previously applied the juice of a special plant to the box, which causes a rash on the skin. The lock in the box is complex. It can only be opened with bare hands. So now the maids must show their hands. As Astel had expected, one of the maids had a terrible rash on her arms. The girl fell to her knees and began to ask for forgiveness. She was crying so hard that it was difficult to make out what she was saying. Astel calmed the girl down and promised her that if she told the truth, she would be able to avoid a terrible punishment. Otherwise, Lady Leston will officially accuse her of trespassing and attempted poisoning. It's clear that the Emperor will not forgive this kind of servant. Therefore, the maid told everything down to the smallest detail. As it turned out, the maid was hired by Lady Marianne. She asked the girl to secretly climb into the room and look at everything that the guest had brought with her. The maid caught the eye of a strange but very expensive box. It was locked with a key. Without thinking for a long time, the Emperor called Lady Mariana into his office and asked if what the maid was talking about was true. Is it true that Mariana offered money to the maid in exchange for checking the contents of the box? Marianne Crouch was furious and denied absolutely everything. How can you trust ordinary maids and question the words of a worthy woman? The maid is blatantly lying and wants to slander her. It was Astel who bribed her. When there was no longer any point in lying, Marianne said that she did it for the safety of the Emperor. This box seemed suspicious to her, and indeed inside it were medicinal herbs and bottles. Therefore, Lady Crouch was obliged to check everything. It was clear from the Emperor's appearance that he was in a real rage. Since when did Lady Marianne decide that she was responsible for His Majesty's safety? Nobody asked her to do this. Rummaging through other people's things is at least strange and impolite. Astel asked the Emperor. She turned to Mariana and asked the girl if she had brothers or sisters. Lady Crouch nodded in agreement. Next, Astel asked the impudent woman if there were medicinal herbs in her house in case of childhood colds, indigestion, improved sleep, and other things. Everyone who has small children has such drugs. Astel is no exception. Lady Crouch had nothing to say in her own defense. Indeed, every nanny in her house had with her a bag of medicinal herbs for various diseases. It was the hillbilly who put her in her place again. But Marianne decided not to give up. She asked why Lady Leston had so many medicinal herbs for one small child. There are enough of them for a whole kindergarten. And how does a simple village girl know the recipes for medicines? Astel calmly replied that she was currently a beggar. She lives with her grandfather, penniless, and once she got sick, she had to independently learn how to make medicine from a variety of plants. The Emperor listened carefully to both girls. He understood that there was not an iota of criminal motive in Astel's actions. These herbs were really intended only for providing first aid to a small child. There was nothing else suspicious there. Astel carefully looked around everyone present. Then she asked the Emperor if she had satisfied his curiosity. The Kaiser replied that he no longer had a single question for the girl. Marianne was simply furious. How can the Kaiser trust this hillbilly? She definitely wants to do something mean to the Emperor. She wants to open the eyes of the ruler, but no one listens to her. Astel objected. She was not going to let herself be offended and parried every attack from Lady Crouch. If she secretly searched the girl for safety reasons, then she made sure that everything was in order, and Astel did not wish harm to anyone. And then the climax of the conversation began. Astel wondered aloud that Lady Marianne had not simply opened the box out of curiosity. If that were the case, she wouldn't have done it twice, so she wanted to put something there. After such words from the Emperor's ex-wife, Lady Crouch stopped blaming Astel for the attempt on the Kaiser's life. She desperately began to make excuses, trying to save her reputation with the ruler. The young boar burst into tears and asked the Emperor to believe her. And Astel at this time thought that she had made herself another fierce enemy as the daughter of the most influential duke in the country, who has immense power. The Emperor, in turn, did not expect such meanness from a girl who was close to the palace and the Kaiser himself. Therefore, the man ordered Marianne to be taken to the West Wing dungeon, while the punishment for insulting the guest was chosen. At that very moment, the guards began to carry out the Emperor's orders. They grabbed Marianne Crouch and dragged her to prison. She was scary, abandoned, and cold. No one has used it for a long time. Then Kaiser turned to Astel and expressed his regret about what happened. He asked for forgiveness for the fact that this was done to the girl in his house, but he won't allow this to happen again and the culprit will be punished. Astel did not intend to make some kind of sensation out of this case. Therefore, the girl accepted the apology. These were small things compared to what she had to endure as the official wife of Emperor Lastiel. Since she was 10 years old, she has gone through a lot to be worthy of being called the Emperor's wife. This case was much simpler, but I wouldn't want to repeat this. She went to the room to give Theo some medicine, but in the corridor, the Emperor's secretary caught up with her. He asked for her attention for a moment and reminded her that the girl had willingly made the Crouch family her personal enemy. Therefore, now you need to be very careful. The guy added quietly that he knows for sure that Duke Crouch does not forgive insults that concern his daughters. It turns out that there is also a second daughter, Lady Florin. Marianne's sister is much more cunning and vindictive. It is this girl who now has every chance to become the next empress. She is very smart and beautiful, and this combination plays an important role for the emperor. Besides, she has long been an adult. The whole family is trying and bending over backwards to ensure that Florin becomes Kaiser Lastiel's chosen one, but so far all their attempts have been unsuccessful. The emperor considers her just a friend. Astel thought to herself that the girl's parents were either abnormal or desperately wanted to get closer to power. How else to explain the fact that they allow sisters to fight for the heart of one man? Cloud Bellion seemed to be able to read minds because he said that it was abnormal of him that both girls wanted to become empress. But the elite of this society turns a blind eye to such actions. Astel replied to the secretary that she was not interested in this information. Immediately after the matter with the will is resolved, she will immediately leave the walls of this house forever. Astel is not going to fight for the emperor's heart again. Then the secretary politely asked for tea. Astel was not against it, but something in the young man's behavior alarmed her. Maybe he was assigned by the Kaiser to keep an eye on her. It was noticeable that the young man was trying to control all his actions and words, but at the same time, the guy unobtrusively tried to ask the girl about everything, and this is definitely not easy. From Cloud Bellion, Astel learned that the emperor was not in the castle. He seemed to have gone hunting. The rain stopped for a while, but will intensify again in the evening, and perhaps the Kaiser will have to return. Suddenly, Theo appeared on the terrace and handed his aunt his Levin bear. It turned out that the toy was torn, and the boy was very upset about this. Tears appeared in his eyes. Astel calmed the child and asked him not to cry. She will deal with this problem in a few minutes. The girl told the maid to bring thread and a needle so that she could sew up the toy and give it to the boy. Not the least bit embarrassed, Astel began fixing the teddy bear right at the table where Cloud Bellman was sitting. The toy was quite old, made from an old curtain, which is why it tore so often. If the girl had known that Theo would love this bear so much and would carry it with him everywhere, then Astel would have chosen a completely different material, stronger and more beautiful. But the boy did not complain. He loved Levin just like that. The emperor's secretary carefully observed this entire situation. He also felt sorry for the boy. The young man reminded Theo that there were many real bears walking around the castle and they could be seen. But Astel categorically objected. The forests here are too dangerous due to wild animals. Bears are not the calmest and friendliest, and Theo is still too small to walk in the forest. And then something happened that Astel was very afraid of. The boy came too close to the secretary and he saw the real color of his eyes, and they were deep blue. But very soon the color will change to bright red, so you need to quickly get the boy out of here. Astel invited Theo to take a walk around the emperor's castle instead of the forest, to which he readily agreed. Until this moment, she had not allowed the child to leave her room unless necessary. But now is a special case, too dangerous. It is necessary to remove the boy away from the piercing gaze of the imperial secretary. When the maid took the joyful Theo for a walk around the castle grounds, Astel, as if nothing had happened, continued the conversation with Cloud Bellman. "We can't let this cunning guy suspect anything." The girl exhaled calmly. "You need to extend the effect of the drug closer to dinner, so she still has enough time. You can relax a little and try to find out more information from Bellman." Theo was delighted with the size and beauty of the house. He asked the maid to walk with him along the alley near the castle. Everything was interesting to him, because the child had never seen such beauty. The maid couldn't keep up with him. When Theo ran out onto the main alley, he saw the emperor heading inside the room. The boy decided it was worth saying hello and greeted the Kaiser. "These are the rules of good manners that my mother taught." The Kaiser suddenly looked around. His nephew Astel greeted him. I think the boy's name was Theo. There was something unusual about the child, but the emperor could not understand what it was. He nodded his head without emotion. A frightened maid immediately ran up to Theo, who had not kept track of the child. The girl began to tearfully ask for forgiveness and explained that Miss Astel had asked her to walk around the castle grounds while she was talking with Mr. Bellman. Theo was completely spontaneous and asked the usual question. The boy was interested in where the emperor was going. The man sat down next to the baby and replied that he was going into the forest to hunt. The boy was incredibly interested in the information. He had already heard that there were real wild bears in these forests. Therefore, Theo decided to ask the emperor again whether this was true or whether people, as always, exaggerate everything. The man began to be amused by the boy's sincere curiosity. He even cheered up a little. Then the emperor asked if Theo wanted to see a real bear. If yes, then he can easily arrange it. At first, the boy's eyes lit up with indescribable delight. Of course he wants to see the bear, but then he remembered that Aunt Astel categorically forbade him to leave the castle grounds without her permission. He doesn't go anywhere without her. I found this very strange. Usually children his age do what they want. They rarely listen to adults. But this boy's actions and words are always correct and logical. A million thoughts swarmed in the emperor's head. I wonder if this child misses his real mother. It is clear that he is very attached to Astel. But then the maid interrupted his thoughts and said that the lady asked to bring the boy back before dinner. The emperor nodded. It is impossible for Astel to take the boy and take him into the forest without asking, so the Kaiser patted him on the head and promised to show him the bears next time. There was something about this boy that attracted the emperor's attention with an incomprehensible force. The man sincerely wanted to show the child real bears. He does not have a father, so it is unlikely that anyone other than him will be able to fulfill this childhood request. And Theo himself caught every glance and every word of the emperor. The man was so commanding, serious, and focused. He must be very brave and strong, since he goes alone into the forest to hunt dangerous animals. Meanwhile, at the table on the terrace, the conversation between Astel and the emperor's secretary continued. The young man noticed that quite a lot of time had already passed, and for some reason Theo had not returned from his walk. Astel apologized to the man and said that it was already quite late and she was a little worried about the boy. Now she needs to leave Bellman and go look for her nephew to feed him and put him to bed. But the secretary turned out to be overly annoying. He said that he was ready to accompany the lady. He will help quickly find the maid with the child so that Astel does not worry. The girl thought that the secretary's company would be unnecessary for her. In addition, he can be the first to meet the child, and Theo's eye color may already change. Then the secretary will find out the terrible truth, and this cannot be allowed. Therefore, Astel decided to politely refuse the man's company. She said that there is still enough time, and if the boy likes to walk here, then let him take the moment and enjoy all this beauty. She will only be glad. After some more time, Astel nevertheless went in search of her child. It was already late, and she was afraid that the boy's eyes had returned to their natural color. Then she will no longer be able to get out. A butler appeared on Astel's way. The man, as always, was calm, but after the girl asked if he had seen Theo and his maid, he became slightly agitated and did not know what to say to the lady now. The emperor's secretary approached Astel and the butler. He asked the same question to the man, and seeing that the secretary knew something, but did not want to say, he reminded the man that Astel was worried, because the child was still small. Almost crying, the butler said that His Majesty asked to keep this a secret, but apparently he would have to tell everything. It turned out that the emperor, at the boy's request, took him with him to the forest to hunt bears. Astel almost lost consciousness from what she heard, and Bellman opened his eyes wide. How can this be? After all, Theo is still just a child. Why take him to such a dangerous and difficult event? He may get scared. The butler explained that the young master very much asked His Highness to take him with him. At first, the emperor refused, but then he took pity on the child and said that they would go into the forest for a while, so Theo could see the bears. But Astel had already stopped listening to the man's explanations. She asked Count Bellman how long it would take to get into the forest and find the emperor. He replied that they would reach the place in an hour. If she goes into the forest right now, she might have time to give the boy the drug, and his eyes will remain blue. Astel said that Theo recently had the flu and is still taking medications that should not be skipped. The secretary remembered how the girl said that even Theo, at 5 years old, was already on the verge of life and death due to a cold. So she regularly gives him 3 nutritional supplements, and this is very important for the child's health. Then the girl decided to turn on actress mode and said in a tragic voice that if Theo got wet or caught a cold, he could become deathly ill. Although she herself understood perfectly well that the emperor would not allow this. The secretary said that in principle, they could hit the road right away. But a thunderstorm is brewing that could catch them in the middle of the road. Is there an urgent need to go to the forest? The girl insisted, because she was terribly worried about the child. Therefore, Bellman had no choice but to agree to accompany Astel to the emperor. He ordered the butler to bring the carriage to the main entrance. They hit the road. Astel understood that the carriage was too heavy and slow transport, and she can't waste a second. So she asked for a horse. The girl lied that she had not ridden a horse for a long time, and this was just the right occasion. A quarter of an hour later, 2 horsemen were already racing through the forest. It was starting to rain, but Astel didn't even pay attention to it. She needed to give Theo the drug before his eyes turned red. The hunting lodge in the forest was restless. The emperor's assistant reported that the rain had washed out the road, so the cart could no longer pass. So he won't have time to return the child back to the castle before dinner. The emperor understood that he had problems. He won't be able to show Theo the bears, and he won't return Astel's child until sunset. Moreover, he did not warn the girl that he had taken her nephew and taken him far into the forest. But Astel behaves very calmly, despite what he did to her. And here again the emperor exposes himself in a bad light in front of the girl. How can he now apologize to his ex-wife? His actions are simply terrible. The boy foresaw the emperor's thoughts, so he decided to calm the man down a little. He understood that due to the rain, they were unlikely to see at least one bear. But His Majesty is not to blame for this because he wanted what was best. At this point, Kaiser had an interesting idea. He can show the child a bear that was tamed by hunters and now lives on the territory of the hunting lodge. The boy was simply delighted with the offer. After this, in order to at least keep the child busy, the emperor ordered the servants to bring a large hound dog into the office so that Theo could play with it a little. And the boy accepted this offer with great gratitude. The dog, to Kaiser's surprise, turned out to be very affectionate and playful. She licked the boy from head to toe, gave her paw at his request, and followed absolutely all commands. The boy and the dog became friends. Theo got a little distracted and forgot that he had promised his mother that he would be back from his walk in time for dinner. And he would have returned if a thunderstorm had not started, and he and the emperor had not been stuck in the middle of the forest. While the boy was playing with the dog, the emperor and the chief of security, Sir Lyndon, were actively thinking about how to return Theo to his aunt as quickly as possible. She is probably very worried and is looking for the child throughout the castle. Theo did not notice how, while playing with the dog, he moved from the house to the terrace and then completely to the street. The boy was not at all afraid of the rain, and he quickly ran after the dog straight into the forest. He was having a lot of fun. Astel was also not afraid of the rain. She raced on her horse despite the lightning and thunder. Secretary Bellman could barely keep up with her. He shouted that it was too dangerous to ride in such weather, but the girl did not hear him. She didn't pay any attention to the man's screams, and this made him angry. Why is Astel in such a hurry? After all, she is not bringing medicine to the child, but simply a herbal supplement. It seems like it's not just anxiety, but something much more than that. It's all too confusing. Nobody expected the Empress's last will, and the princess, who could not know anything, avoided being wanted for a long time. And when she showed up, the Duke of Leston began to act. Maybe all this is part of some cunning and secret plan, but on the other hand, why then is this girl so worried about her little nephew? We need to find out what role little Theo plays here. And with the appearance of his ex-wife and this child in the castle, the emperor began to behave quite strangely. He spies on the girl unnoticed by others. Maybe he still has feelings for her, or maybe he also has a secret plan. No matter how the girl drove her horse, she realized that time had already run out, and she did not have time to give Theo the drug. Soon his pupils will acquire their true color, and the emperor will know the whole truth. And at that time, Theo and his already beloved dog stood in front of Kaiser, completely wet. It turned out that they decided to play in the rain and didn't care if their clothes got wet to the skin. They asked the man for forgiveness. Although the emperor had no experience in caring for children, he understood perfectly well that in wet clothes a child could catch a cold and get sick. And that's the last thing he wants right now. Something needs to be done, and very quickly. He asked his assistant to find some clothes for the child, but he bowed and explained that no one had ever brought children here before. That's why he won't find clothes for Theo here. The boy and the dog were having so much fun that they didn't care whether their clothes were wet or dry. The emperor decided that they would quickly dry these clothes. He really hoped that the boy would not get sick. On the recommendation of the security chief, Cyrus Linden, Kaiser brought a warm terry towel and began to dry the boy's hair. This way they should dry faster, which means colds can be avoided. Theo loved the hound dog so much that after the emperor dried him with a towel, he took the towel and began to dry the shaggy miracle. It was love at first sight. The emperor was nearby and observed the situation. The man carefully examined the boy, who was incredibly similar to Astel. He wondered why Theo's eyes were so light. A rustling sound was heard on the street. 2 horsemen rode up to the hunting lodge. This was the emperor's secretary, and with him Astel. Balian asked if Kaiser and little Theo were here. When the servant replied that His Majesty and the little master were inside the house, Astel breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe she will still have time to correct the situation, and the emperor will not notice anything. The guests were also wet from head to toe. The servants brought towels and dry clothes. The girl couldn't wait to see her son and make sure that his eyes were still blue. She was only 30 minutes late. There was a knock on the door of the emperor's office, and his personal secretary Cloud Balian appeared on the threshold. There was a girl behind the guy. Looking closer, I saw my ex-wife. Now he will have to make excuses. He expected Astel to be furious and start shouting, reproaching the emperor for his irresponsibility. But to his surprise, the girl was slightly sad and very tired. She didn't even intend to attack the emperor. The Kaiser didn't know where to start with his apology. The situation was really stupid, and he himself acted like a little child. But he didn't think things would turn out this way. Little could be read from Astel's expression, total sadness and nothing more. The girl did not know whether the emperor realized that his son was his. She hasn't seen the boy yet and doesn't know what color his eyes are. The Kaiser approached Astel and straightened her towel. The girl has already dried out a little. Then he turned to his secretary and asked what happened. They arrived at the hunting lodge in such weather. There was nothing to do, and she decided to continue playing the story that little Theo needed to take his medicine regularly and, most importantly, on time. That is why she asked the secretary to go with her to the hunting lodge. The emperor decided to reassure his ex-wife and said that everything was fine with her nephew. The boy was playing outside with a dog and got a little wet. Now Theo is sleeping sweetly near the fireplace. Everything is fine with him. While the emperor explained the situation to Astel, she looked at the man and could not stop admiring him. He spoke so tenderly about Theo. The Kaiser would probably be a very good father and would love his child madly. But for some time it just froze. When she returned to reality, she asked the emperor for permission to take the boy to her room. He needs to be undressed, put to bed, and given medicine. The emperor had nothing against it. The child really needs to be taken to the room. Besides, Astel was very wet. The girl would also do well to warm up and rest a little. It was clear that she was nervous. It was important for the girl to take the boy away from the emperor, who was sleeping and his eyes were closed. Already in the room, when Theo woke up, he saw that the child's pupils had turned red. Out of joy and excess of emotions, the girl hugged the boy tightly and burst into tears. She is nearby, and now everything will be fine. Judging by the emperor's reaction, Theo fell asleep before the time his eye color changed. This means the boy's identity is still undisclosed, and this makes the girl very happy. It would be nice to quickly settle all matters with the will of the late empress and take the child away from the emperor and his entourage. The Kaiser remained in his office and chatted with his secretary. The strange thing was that the girl rushed through the entire forest in such weather just to give the boy medicine from some herbs. Is he really that sick? I also didn't really understand why Astel was so insistent on seeing the boy. Perhaps she was afraid that the emperor might harm the child. Or maybe she has some secret reasons that they don't know about. The young man constantly replayed in his head all the conversations with the emperor's ex-wife. Yes, Astel said that the child had the flu, and now he should not skip medications. And in the forest she kept whispering that there was very little time left. Nothing is clear yet. The young lady also used a strange plant to catch the criminal who entered her room. How does an ordinary lady know about the properties of such plants? The girl put the child to bed, having first given him eye drops, and went down to the emperor. Meanwhile, Belian thought that Astel should have the medicine. Check everything while she's in Kaiser's office. When both men raised their eyes to look at Astel, they gasped in unison in surprise. The girl was dressed in a stunning dress and looked simply stunning. She really looked like an empress. She noticed the admiring glances of the men and explained that her clothes were completely wet and the servants had found a dry dress for her. It turned out that only this outfit was available. The Kaiser decided that now was the right moment to sincerely apologize to the girl. He explained that he wanted to show the child the bears and quickly return from the forest before dinner. But the thunderstorm prevented them. The girl smiled for the first time that evening and said that she was not at all offended by the emperor. Theo has already spent too much time within four walls. The boy is bored, and it's obvious. She is grateful to Kaiser that he decided to cheer up her nephew. Finally, the emperor himself smiled sincerely. The internal tension subsided a little, and the man calmed down. He asked Astel if the girl had brought medicine for the boy. The girl explained the situation. It turned out that Theo does not have a fatal disease. He was just born very weak and needs special care. It just so happens that sometimes weak children are born in grandmother's house, for example, like Astel's mother. And here again the emperor sensed a discrepancy. The girl's mother did not die from weakness or illness. The woman died in an accident. Something doesn't add up here. Maybe the medicine is just an excuse to see Kaiser. Then there was a knock on the emperor's office, and the chief of security, Sir Linden, appeared on the threshold. The man said that urgent news had arrived from the dense mansion. It is necessary that the emperor read the message. According to Sir Linden's guesses, Mr. Kahlenberg became much worse. A few days ago, a poor man was paralyzed due to a serious illness. His condition worsened significantly. Astel almost burst into tears. Her beloved, strong, and brave grandfather is now in critical condition, but the girl is very far away and cannot help him in any way. This all happened only through her fault. He always felt a little bad, and now the condition has worsened due to the fact that grandfather ended up in foreign lands. There is a completely different climate here that does not suit him. Besides, he worries about his granddaughter. Astel fell to her knees and sobbed loudly. The two men did not know what to do in such a situation. None of them dared to console the girl, and Astel breathed a sigh of relief. Everything went according to her plan. So far, no one has any idea. Her grandfather, Duke Kahlenberg, was always healthy and strong beyond his years. The former war hero was even more energetic than his granddaughter and was never sick. But in her last letter, which she allowed the secretary to read, the girl was interested in the headaches and chronic illness of her beloved grandfather. She was worried about his condition. It was a very complex and cunning plan, but she remained very confident that her grandfather could help her. He will play along with her and immaculately fulfill the role of an old sick man. In tears, Astel turned to His Highness with a huge request. She asked the Kaiser to take Theo and go with the child to Den's castle. What if grandfather dies and she still won't be able to say goodbye to him? The fever called Inez was an insidious disease. The infection was typical for the northeastern part of the continent and was highly contagious. The death of plum trees was an omen of disease. From the windows of her room, the girl could see the silver plum tree. Its flowers have become dark and very dull, and she immediately realized that the appearance of the disease in the empire was inevitable. But no one knows yet. One evening, the maid filled Theo's bath. The boy had to take a bath before going to bed. Astel accompanied him. The child had a toy bear in his hands. The maid reminded the girl that the toy was very old. If it gets wet, it will be very difficult to fix Mishka. Then Astel decided to leave the toy in the locker room. He gave the toy to the maid and asked the woman to take good care of Levin. This toy is very dear to him. The maid promised that she would leave Mishka in her room while the boy took a bath. The woman quickly took the bear and went to her room. There she very carefully felt the toy, but was disappointed. No one hid anything inside the toy bear, just like in Theo's medicine box. Then the maid ran out into the street where the stranger was already impatiently waiting for her. The woman said that she checked absolutely everything, but did not find anything unusual in the guest's belongings. As it turned out later, this woman did not even work in the emperor's castle. She pretended to be one of the maids in order to search Lady Leston's room. They promised to pay her well for entering the castle and doing her job. This woman was an ordinary pharmacist and knew about herbs and medicinal plants. There was nothing unusual in Mrs. Leston's box except a few dried herbs, but they were not poisonous. Already in the bathroom, Astel took out a small vial of liquid from her head of hair. She barely managed to get it out of the teddy bear. Only at the last moment did the girl realize that the maid was not entirely ordinary. The woman's body emanated a pungent herbal odor. So she doesn't clean this house. She is a healer or a pharmacist. Only people of such professions can smell like that. There were also a lot of green spots from grass juice on this strange woman's fingers. They were not hatched if a person constantly dealt with plants, cut them, or sorted them out. She's definitely not a maid. If the maid had worked in the emperor's castle for a long time, she would have long ago noticed the signs of Inez's approaching fever. This disease is fatal, but is highly treatable in the early stages. The only person in the castle who could send a pharmacist to her is Secretary Cloudbellion. He's been too predictable for a long time. I wonder if the guy really cares about the life of his emperor. Without thinking for a long time, Astel decided to use the drug right in the bathroom while little Theo was in the water. She dropped a drop of liquid into each of the boy's eyes. The boy did not quite understand the meaning of these drops. Why can't his eyes remain their natural color? He really liked the bright red hue, but his mother thought differently and asked him to be patient until they left the castle. Theo had long noticed that His Highness's eyes were the same color as his, and the boy so wanted to brag about this fact to the emperor. But my mother strictly forbade me to do this. The boy had never asked this before. It is possible that the meeting with the Kaiser influenced him, and now he really wants to be like the emperor. But it's too early for him to know about everything. When it cooled down, she helped the boy get out of the bath and dried him with a towel. It reminded me of the story about the farmer and the magic balls. If anyone found out about these balls, the farmer would be executed and his jewelry would be taken away from him. The boy's eyes look exactly like these magic balls. If someone finds out about their real color, they will want to use them. Therefore, he must hide his real eye color as the greatest and rarest jewel. People shouldn't know that his pupils are red, but the boy could not calm down. What about His Majesty? Why doesn't he hide his red, precious, and magical eyes? Why is such a unique treasure being shown to all the people in the empire? Astel explained it very simply and somewhat childishly. She told Theo that he was not yet as strong as Emperor Kaiser, so now he needs to pretend to be a small farmer and hide his treasure. The girl was grateful to all the higher powers that gave her such a smart and intelligent child. He always obeyed his mother and never contradicted her. Therefore, Astel was not afraid that Theo might ruin everything. She understood perfectly well that the time would come, and then she would definitely find out the truth about who his real dad really was. But it's too early for him to know about it. Let him grow up a little. Wiping her hands, the girl froze in surprise and fear. She found strange red spots all over her body. Astel guessed what it was. There could be no doubt, this was an epidemic called Inez fever. The emperor was also already aware of the deadly disease that was attacking his lands. Sir Lyndon said they needed to return to the castle, and if they travel through the south to avoid contaminated areas, they will spend 3 days longer on the road. But there was a much more serious problem. The fact is that several villages were already under quarantine and people continued to get sick. But due to the lack of medicine, no one has been cured yet. If this continues, there will be trouble. The Kaiser clenched his fists until it hurt. The situation seemed hopeless at the moment. Without treatment and the necessary medical care, his people were in a trap, from which he did not yet see a way out. The man ordered his assistant to first allocate soldiers and the necessary money for the village residents. Pharmacists and doctors also need to be sent there. The epidemic must be stopped at all costs. Over the past few decades, there has not been a single worthy ruler. The emperors of past years only increased their power and territories, and not one of them cared about the population and its condition. The last emperor before the Kaiser was generally a puppet doll. He was in the tenacious hands of the Lestons and other aristocrats. He had no intention of thinking about the people. The Kaiser sincerely wanted to be better than his predecessors, and he really started the right reform. It was necessary to develop the country and lead it forward so that such situations would never happen again. For some reason right now, Kaiser really wanted to see his ex-wife. Without understanding why he was doing this, the man headed towards her room and quietly knocked on the door. A few moments passed and the door suddenly opened. Astel stood on the threshold. The girl looked at the emperor and did not know how to behave in such a situation. Why did he come to her room so late? The girls needed to somehow hide the signs of their illness, so Astel wrapped herself completely in a scarf and told the man that she wasn't feeling very well. The emperor frowned and looked carefully at his ex-wife. He was even afraid to admit in his head the thought that Astel could have become infected with an epidemic. The girl looked, frankly speaking, not in the best way. An unpleasant chill ran down Kaiser's spine. He leaned towards the girl to get a better look at her. She tried to pull away and said that she probably had a fever. If she is sick, she can infect the emperor. It was necessary to urgently call a doctor. The man was really confused. What kind of emperor is he if he is unable to help even his closest people? And yes, he still considered Astel a very close person to himself. The girl seemed to read his thoughts, so she immediately decided to calm the man down. She doesn't have a fever. Inez, don't be scared. This is a normal fever due to hypothermia, and her skin reacts this way. But the doctor was still immediately called to the hunting lodge. He examined the girl and confirmed her words. Inez fever. It is characterized by large black spots. The symptoms of this terrible disease are different from those of Lady Astel. The emperor breathed a sigh of relief. The doctor will now prescribe treatment for his ex-wife, and she will quickly get back on her feet and recover. There was no reason to worry. We need to think now about how to help the people of the country. He will become the best ruler of this empire at any cost, and people will be grateful to him for taking care of them. Therefore, it is necessary to stop the epidemic and prevent it from taking over the entire country. The emperor caught himself thinking that he did not want to leave the girl unattended for a second. He constantly wanted to be nearby to be sure that Astel was okay. He ordered the employees to first inform the managers about the illness. Then he ordered more people to be sent to care for the sick. Constant and qualified supervision by doctors is required. For Astel, the emperor ordered chambers to be prepared, more comfortable and spacious. But the girl categorically refused to change the room. It was convenient for her to be here. But the doctor took Kaiser's side and said that it was impossible to be in this room. There is little air and light here. In addition, the girl needs peace, and it is always noisy here since the room is close to the living room and dining room. Astel began to get angry about this situation. Why is she getting so much attention? She feels fine and is able to control her condition independently. A real Inez fever is spreading throughout the city and surrounding area. Everyone froze in surprise. Did the girl really know about the approaching epidemic? She replied that it was not difficult to find out. The leaves and flowers of the plum tree began to fade, and this meant that a terrible infection was in the air. And when Kazan heard the word fever from her and began to behave extremely strangely, she immediately realized that he was hiding from her the fact that things were bad and people were already sick with Inez fever. In times like these, when public sentiment is unstable, rumors tend to mislead everyone. Therefore, if it becomes known that there is a person with a fever next to the emperor, unrest will begin among the people. The Kaiser mentally concluded that his ex-wife was very wise and intelligent. She doesn't want him to find himself in a difficult situation, so she acts in a way that will benefit the ruler. She doesn't want to hurt him. If rumors spread around the area that a person with a fever was staying here with the emperor, the entire village would suffer. She hastened to reassure those present and said that she already had experience in treating fever. Once she already had to make a cure for it for little Theo. Therefore, she is not afraid, and she is ready to help. This worked to Astel's advantage. She asked permission to go into the forest to collect the necessary herbs. Then she can prepare a cure for the fever. This way, the girl will also collect the ingredients for Theo's eye drops, and no one will suspect anything. The doctor suggested placing the girl's nephew in a separate room to avoid his infection and prevent the spread of infection. The boy didn't mind at all, but he demanded that his beloved dog be in the room with him. He even came up with a nickname for the dog. Theo named the dog Pancake, and indeed, she looked like a yellow pancake with honey. Dam also didn't seem to mind being with his new friend all the time. Astel also noticed that she had already met a pharmacist here before. Therefore, he can talk to the woman and get some of the necessary herbs from her. At the same time, the girl carefully looked at Secretary Bellion's reaction. But Bellion was not a timid person, so he withstood this gaze with dignity and did not even flinch. The emperor, on the contrary, was very surprised that a pharmacist came to the hunting lodge. The Kaiser allowed the girl to go to the herbalist the next day and consult with her about treating the local residents. But Astel should not go to her alone. It is better to take several people for protection and escort. Immediately in the presence of the emperor, Astel turned to Cloud Bellion and asked him to accompany her tomorrow to a female pharmacist who had been here recently. Indeed, accompanied by a secretary, she will be calmer. The butler decided to help the girl and told her that behind the castle there were hunting grounds and a large grass field that belonged to the lord. The herbs that are not there are in the pharmacist's storage. In the middle of the field, the girl decided to bring Bellion to clean water. She said that if the guy himself did not confess, then she would personally tell His Majesty that on the orders of the secretary, her room was checked several times. The guy didn't even think that Astel was so smart. He asked for forgiveness. He was just wondering what happened in the villa last time. Is the girl hiding some terrible illness in her child? Astel said that this time she forgives the secretary and will not say anything to His Majesty. But if she needs any help, she will definitely turn to Bellion for it. The guy quickly realized that he was trapped and would now be in debt to the young lady. But this did not frighten him at all. He replied that he was ready to help Astel at any moment. Having someone like that around Astel wouldn't hurt. It is better to maintain friendly relations with Bellion. He really has a lot of influence and will be able to help at the right time. Therefore, she invited the guy to go and collect plants together. She even brought a spare hoe for him. I wonder how an influential and rich man who has never worked physically will cope with such a task. But Cloud Bellion was not afraid here either. He took the tool and prepared for work. Now Astel understood why the Kaiser chose Bellion as his personal secretary. This young man could be relied upon. He was not afraid of difficulties and easily solved most problems. As expected, the girl did not need to worry about Bellion. He did an excellent job with the hoe and quickly collected the necessary plants. The guy wasn't even afraid of earthworms. While the emperor's secretary was enthusiastically digging out the necessary herbs and plants and carefully packing them into a purse, Astel tried to find the necessary herb ideas to prepare eye drops for little Theo. The girl went deeper into the forest and began to look for the grass she needed. Fortunately, the emperor's secretary did not even notice that Astel had disappeared from sight. But then the girl heard a strange rustling in the bushes. She looked around sharply and froze in surprise. Emperor Kaiser Lastiel himself was heading towards her. In his hand he held a bouquet of beautiful hydrangeas. Astel involuntarily opened her mouth in surprise. For whom did the man collect these flowers? To prevent the girl from asking questions first, the emperor explained that he had come to help. In addition, the forest can be very dangerous. Astel stood confused and did not understand how she should react to this situation. Actually, the field with plants is just a few minutes' walk from the castle. What danger could await her here? The girls were extremely pleased that the emperor volunteered to help her. But there was another problem. Now it will be very difficult for her to find grass for little Theo and hide it from prying eyes. And then the completely unimaginable happened. The emperor cleared his throat and then awkwardly handed the bouquet to the girl. It turned out that he was collecting these beautiful flowers for her. He asked the doctor what herbs should be collected to treat fever. But while I was going to help Astel and the secretary, I saw these delightful white flowers. He decided that they would also be useful, so he collected a bouquet. Astel sincerely thanked the man for the flowers, but she explained that they would not help in treating the infection. These are ordinary white hydrangeas, although incredibly beautiful, but she will put this bouquet in her room. Time passed, and it was necessary to act. Try to distract the emperor by searching for herbs. This technique had an effect on Bellion, and the guy lost sight of her. Maybe this trick will work with the Kaiser. She asked the man to help find a medicinal herb that she really needed. Looks like these flowers, but it has a shorter stem and fewer flowers. The emperor happily agreed. But with the emperor, it was much more difficult. He found flowers you once came to Astel to ask if they had healing properties. The girls had to constantly come up with some excuses and send Kaiser back into the bushes. Bellion had already collected a whole basket of various herbs and went to look for the mistress. He heard her voice, but clearly she was not alone in the clearing. Coming closer, the guy saw that His Majesty the Kaiser was helping the girl. The secretary left a basket of herbs near the girl and decided not to disturb the emperor and his former wife. And Astel reassured Kaiser, who could not find the necessary plants. The man asked when the girl learned to understand medicinal herbs. She replied that a pharmacist lived next to her grandfather's estate. They became friends, and Astel learned how to make medicine from her. The emperor sighed heavily and said that he was very sorry that the girl could not officially study to become a pharmacist. She would become a good specialist, because everything she did was possible without her taking on it. She looked closely at her ex-husband. Now he was so sincere and absolutely ordinary. This is how she remembered him. She still loves him that way, she's just afraid to even admit it to herself. She remembered the events of 8 years ago. Then the Crown Prince turned 18 years old, and he decided to celebrate this holiday in the hunting grounds. They were located near the estate of Duke Kalenberg. The attendant told the Crown Prince a local legend. Since ancient times, they say that a real fairy lives in the local pond. She gives love to everyone who makes a wish. This lake is located very close. But the young prince only snorted. He considered such stories to be pure nonsense. Are there still people who still believe in such fables? Fairies did not exist and do not exist. But Astel, who accompanied the Crown Prince, became very interested in this legend. She asked the attendant what happened to men who made wishes from the fairy. He looked at the young duchess and replied that the last guy who was by the lake recently had a beautiful lover, as beautiful as Madame Astel. Without telling anyone, the young prince decided to go to the lake on his own to check on the legend. He drove out of the forest to a strange clearing. It was very flat, and no grass grew on it. But as soon as the horse stepped into this clearing, it immediately began to fall through the ice. As it turned out, this is not a clearing at all, but a lake covered with snow. The Kaiser did not notice this and began to drown along with his horse. He had already begun to say goodbye to life because getting out of the icy water on his own was unrealistic. But then he heard his name, and someone's hands began to pull him to the shore. It was Astel. She saved him from death. But then the girl herself stumbled, and the next second her body dived under the ice. The Crown Prince saw only a wave of his hand. A terrible panic seized him. He must pull the girl out of the water. An hour later, the young prince dragged Astel's almost frozen body into the palace in his arms. He immediately shouted to the servants to call the doctor and prepare a hot bath. The girl must be saved at all costs. For the next few days, the guy did not leave his beloved's bed. He gave her hot tea and spoon-fed her. The Crown Prince ensured that the girl took all her medications and recovered quickly. The guy did not see any fairy on the lake, but he perfectly understood one fact, that he had already found his beloved. Now she, poor thing, lies in bed and is sick because of him, but she will definitely get better. Even the doctors could not convince Kaiser to go to his room for even an hour and get some rest. He didn't want to hear anything. The guy took his pillow to Astel's room and spent the night next to her on the sofa. When Astel came to her senses, the maid told the girl that the Crown Prince had been by her bed all the time. Today he allowed himself to leave his mistress's room for a while. Astel was terribly worried. She asked the maid to help her get ready. You can't meet the Crown Prince in such a terrible state. But the girl reminded that the young lady was still ill and too weak to dress up and meet the Kaiser. But as it turned out, the Crown Prince had no intention of returning to Astel's room. He informed his secretary that he would like to continue the hunt that had been interrupted a few days ago. He urgently needs to return to the hunting grounds. But in fact, the guy dreamed of getting to the lake and making a wish so that Astel would never leave him. It seems the Kaiser also remembered this story, because he took his cloak and gently wrapped the girl. At the same time, he reminded Astel that it was already cold and she might freeze. Her body is also weakened now, so she should be vigilant. The girl even blushed from embarrassment. She did not expect such an act from her ex-husband. Although she's probably lying to herself, she dreamed of such an act on the part of the emperor. And then the Kaiser grabbed the girl's hand. He looked somewhere at one point and said in a whisper that it seemed that he had found that very medicinal herb. This was his small victory for today. She finally found the plant she needed. It looked like it was time to return home. Now she can prepare drops for little Theo. A surprise awaited at Astel Castle. Entering her room, she didn't recognize it right away. It turned out that the emperor ordered the girl to be carefully left alone. Now it looked like a queen's apartment. The room has also undergone changes. Now there was a wide variety of toys, a comfortable children's bed, and a bunch of all sorts of trinkets. The boy was absolutely delighted. Astel noticed that even her son's dog now has his own bed. Pancake was also delighted. But why all these changes? What does the emperor want to show by this? Time was running out, so Astel asked the maid to look after the child for a while. The girl herself needs to prepare drops for Theo's eyes. She found a secluded place in the kitchen and began to work. Astel crushed the desired plant and threw it into a saucepan of boiling water. Everything had to be done quickly and carefully, and most importantly, away from prying eyes. The girl prepared the drops. I decided that I needed to do double the amount right away so that later, if something happens, I don't have to worry. Now she can be calm for a long period of time. There was also quite a lot of medicine for fever. You can already distribute it to sick people. She is confident that this mixture will be quite effective and will help avoid an epidemic. Astel returned to her room calm and satisfied, but before going to bed I decided to look into Theo's room. When she went inside, she saw an interesting picture. Theo slept peacefully in the Emperor's arms. The girl asked the man to explain what happened. He replied that he had come to invite her to dinner together. Since Astel was downstairs, he played a little with Theo and the dog, and then the child fell asleep. But I couldn't find anything to say. She simply apologized to the Emperor for the inconvenience caused by the child. She hopes they won't stay here for long. But to the girl's surprise, the Emperor replied that he had a lot of fun and pleasure playing with the baby. The boy is very smart and funny, and now he wants to personally put him to bed. And suddenly Theo woke up. He didn't understand the situation, and seeing it in front of him, he stood up and called her mom, and then said that he was very glad to have her back. There was a moment of silence. Then Astel gently lifted the child and took him in her arms. She explained to the Emperor that in his dreams the boy often calls for his mother and father. This is a normal situation because although he is weak, he remembers his parents. The Kaiser stood and looked at his ex-wife, who was holding Theo in her arms. The role of a mother would suit her very well, and how lucky this child is that Astel is now taking care of him. When the Emperor left, the girl did not let go of the baby for a long time. A few minutes ago, everything could have ended very badly. We must not allow such situations to happen again, otherwise the truth will come out. In the morning, he slept so soundly that Astel barely managed to wake him up. It was necessary to drop the drug into the eyes because today they are leaving this place. No one can say for sure how long they will be on the road. They spent almost the whole day in the carriage, and only in the evening did it drive up to the Dench residence, where Duke Kalenberg was now located. Grandfather is already tired of waiting for his granddaughter. For some reason, Astel remembered Lady Marianne. I wonder how the girl feels and whether she is still in prison. But even if she is there, then all her relatives are probably preparing a plan for revenge. The Dench residence was huge. On the threshold, they were met by the house manager and given a short tour of the castle. Then Astel asked the woman to take her to her grandfather's room. She desperately wanted to see the old man. Little Theo was the first to run into the arms of the old duke. He also missed his great-grandfather very much. The boy loved this man madly and was very glad to see him again. The duke hugged the baby tightly and began to say, "I've grown a lot and changed a lot." He became a strong and handsome boy. Astel stood aside and watched this sweet picture. Then the girl told the maid that from now on she herself would take care of the sick Duke Kalenberg. She knows what medications and what care her grandfather needs. And she apologized to the Duke for being a little late and inquired about how things were going on at the estate. Grandfather replied that he was treated hospitably and there were no inconveniences. The old Duke asked why his granddaughter stayed for such a long time, and Astel had to tell about all the events that happened to her and Theo during these days. She had a hard time, but she hastened to calm the man down. We need to wait a few more days. Soon it would all be over and she could send Grandpa and Theo back to their home in the south. Both the old Duke of Kalenberg and Astel herself understood perfectly well that the child would be safe only if he left the capital and stayed away from the Emperor. Grandfather completely agreed with Astel's opinion and said that he would do everything necessary so that they could leave the imperial palace as quickly as possible. But he forgot to tell the girl that someone had been waiting for her here for a long time. The Emperor did not waste a minute and immediately upon arrival went to his office. There, the secretary already reported to him that the Duke of Reston had begun to secretly transfer funds. The Kaiser understood that he had no right to be absent from the capital even for a few days. At any moment, the situation in the country could change. It's time to check the social situation in the north and find out how things are going there. The ruler instructed the secretary to go north with the commander of the Ranberg Knights. These knights are the capital's most important force. The whole country knows about this. A group of those influential people who are preparing for an uprising immediately learn that the knights have left the capital. This means that they will have a great opportunity to stage a coup. But they will fall into a cunning trap. The secretary understood everything perfectly. Sometimes he was surprised how cunning the emperor could be. In fact, He will order the knights to remain in place and suppress the uprising at the right time. But then the guy thought that at this rate, Father Astle, Duke of Leston, might soon be declared a traitor. And then what will happen to Mrs. Astle? According to imperial law, all relatives of those who committed high treason are subject to the death penalty. Cloudbellion also reminded his master that Sir Roderick, the manager of this castle, had prepared a welcoming banquet for His Majesty. The evening program will include ballroom dancing. At first, the Emperor thought that the dancing evening was a stupid idea, but then I imagined how Lady Astle would look amazing in a ball gown. She will definitely be present at this event. Therefore, the Emperor agreed. He even dreamed for a minute later that at this evening he would be able to invite his ex-wife to dance. That would be great, but what will society say? How will people regard such an act of the Emperor? This time the secretary did not recognize his boss. The Kaiser was lost in thought and did not seem to notice anything around him. Besides, he hates dancing. Why then does the Emperor have nothing against such entertainment this time? And a guard knocked on the office door and informed the Emperor that the young Lady Florin was asking for an audience. She has been trying to get to a meeting with His Majesty for a long time. The Emperor guessed why Miss Florin wanted to see him. Her sister is now in the castle dungeon. The girl will probably ask the Emperor to pardon her and let her go. The Kaiser allowed Lady Florin to enter the office, and within a second, a young beautiful girl stood in front of the Emperor. Indeed, one could only envy her beauty. The guests looked amazing. She was the second daughter of the Minister of State, the Marquis of Crouch, and also the most influential candidate for the place of the future Empress. The girl entered and bowed to His Majesty as a sign of deep respect. Lady Florin explained that she was at the Emperor's castle at the request of her father. The Marquis wants to apologize for not being able to raise his daughter properly and asks His Highness Surov not to punish his youngest daughter. The Kaiser smiled slyly. I wonder why the Marquis did not personally come to meet him, but sent his eldest daughter. He doesn't want to lose his hard-earned position and sacrifices Lady Marianne. But Lady Florin said that she did not share her father's opinion, so it was she who volunteered to visit the Emperor's castle. And now she is ready to make an important proposal to the Kaiser. At this time, Astle was sitting in her room and wondering what to do next. What if the Emperor does not give permission to take little Theo away from the capital far to the south? But then there was a soft knock on the door. The girl allowed her to enter, and her ex Hannah appeared on the threshold. This girl was her personal maid and friend rolled into one. But how did she get here? 6 years ago, when Astle left the imperial palace, the connection between the two girls was broken. They never saw each other again, and did not even write letters to each other. When Astle left the Emperor's residence, she asked the Empress Dowager to take care of her maid. The woman promised that she would not leave Hannah without work, and would look after her. It turned out that after Astle disappeared, the girl did not stop looking for her. But it was all in vain. No one had any idea where the Emperor's ex-wife had gone. When Hannah found out a few days ago that Mrs. Astle had arrived at the Emperor's residence, she immediately decided to see her. And here she is, hugging her beloved mistress and friend again. Astle didn't even hear Theo and Pancake quietly approach her. The boy looked carefully at the unfamiliar aunt and asked his mother who this woman was. The thought flashed through Astle's head that even Hannah should not be told the truth about Theo. Recently, she stopped trusting anyone, even the closest people, such as her maid. But Hannah herself was ahead of her. She leaned over to Theo and greeted him cheerfully. The girl said that she heard about the boy Theo, who is the son of Mr. Sigmund. She knows that Mrs. Astle is his aunt. The boy carefully examined his new acquaintance. He said hello politely and then introduced Hannah to his friend, a dog named Pancake. He liked the girl. She was modest and very kind. Astle invited the maid to have tea with her, and she readily agreed. During the conversation, Hannah asked if the lady was going to leave for the East when she sorted out all the affairs and the will. The girl replied that she could not wait until she settled this matter with the will of the deceased empress. She misses her home. And the maid asked if it would be possible for her to leave with her mistress to distant lands, far away from here. Hannah said that all these 6 years she regretted that she had not left with Astle. After all, the girl was not only her mistress, but also her most faithful and kind friend. Over the years, she never found new friends. Astle thought about it. All this time her thoughts were occupied with her own problems. She didn't remember her faithful maid at all. Hannah, as a former servant of the deposed empress, probably also had a hard time. She was very glad that she had once again found a faithful servant and a good friend in one person. But still, I decided to ask the girl if she thought well, because this is a serious step. But Hannah had already decided everything. Astel was already thinking that she would need to find a good maid for her grandfather when the emperor returned his pension. And then such luck. She can completely trust Hannah with the old duke, and with herself. The emperor's secretary appeared near the tea table. The guy politely greeted Hannah and asked Astel to give him a few minutes. He would like to talk with the girl alone without prying eyes. It has to do with Lady Marianne. Cloudbellion told the girl that Lady Florin had arrived at the emperor's castle. She is Lady Marianne's older sister and a potential candidate for the role of empress. She wants to help her little sister. And now Lady Florin asks the emperor to allow her to formally apologize to the Duchess of Leston for the actions and words of her sister. Marianne is still very young and stupid. Therefore, Florin herself will apologize. Of course, it would be more logical if Marianne apologized herself. But she is very offended by Astel and the emperor as well. Therefore, Florin will apologize for his sister, and then let the Kaiser determine her punishment. The young secretary was present during Mrs. Florin's conversation with the emperor, and the guy concluded that the younger Crouch sister is much better than the older one. But this girl is much more dangerous. The emperor concluded that according to Mrs. Florin's logic, it was the injured party who should decide what punishment Lady Marianne would suffer for her actions. But first you need to warn Astel herself and ask her opinion. But if the injured party, that is, Astel, refuses to accept an apology from the offender's sister, then the emperor asks not to make plans for revenge against the girl. She was only defending her rights and reputation. Astel listened carefully to the secretary and thought deeply. She doesn't know Lady Florin at all and wouldn't particularly like to accept an apology from her. But she didn't want to spoil her relationship with the emperor's possible future wife. There was little choice. She had to tell Cloudbellion that she was ready to meet with Mrs. Florin and accept an official apology from her. She believes that everyone should be given a chance to correct their mistakes. Someone entered the dungeon, and Marianne closed her eyes against the bright light. It was a security guard. The man said that the lady might be free. The emperor allowed her to leave this terrible place. Marianne was led into the living room where the emperor, his secretary, and that nasty ex-wife of the Kaiser were sitting at the table. The atmosphere was quite tense, but Marianne had to apologize, but she did it insincerely. The young girl did not even hide the fact that she was apologizing solely because of her sister's request. She does not consider herself guilty of anything because she was simply worried about the life of the emperor. Astel reminded Marianne that she accused her of a terrible crime, and if the emperor had followed her words, then the girl's entire family, including little Theo, could have been executed. She was infuriated by the fact that this stupid and stubborn Marianne did not even understand the gravity of her action. And to tell the truth, she desperately wanted to teach this rich, impudent girl a lesson, but she restrained herself. The girl reminded Lady Crouch that she had only met her at her sister's request. And if Marianne continues to behave this way, then all Lady Florin's efforts will simply be in vain. Marianne continued to remain silent, raising her impudent nose. Astel waited a little longer and then called Sir Lyndon to her and asked him to take the accused back to the dungeon. Let her think a little more. In a second, guards appeared in the hall and grabbed the young rude woman. She continued to shout and humiliate Astel. She called her a failed empress for one day, who no one needs. The emperor himself entered the hall, who simply stood in the corridor and watched everything that was happening through the slightly open door. He looked at Marianne and ordered the guards to quickly send the criminal to prison. Then Kaiser entered the room where Astel was sitting. It was clear from his facial expression that the man heard everything. The girl asked the emperor not to punish Mrs. Crouch too much. She's still too young. The man replied that everyone should get what they deserve, and Lady Marianne would be no exception. But that's not what he's here for. The emperor came to see Grandfather Astel and inquire about his health. There was nothing to do. I had to take the emperor to my grandfather's room. The old duke lay in bed and pretended to feel very bad. The Kaiser greeted and stood by the bed. After a short silence, the emperor bowed to the elderly man and asked for forgiveness for causing him a lot of trouble. Due to various circumstances, the Kaiser simply forgot about the old duke and that he had taken his pension. Duke Kallenberg rose higher and sat up on the bed. He said that he does not hold it against the emperor, because he understands that he has many important things to do. And he was very pleased that the Kaiser personally visited the old man. The men talked a little more about government affairs, and then the emperor inquired about the health of Duke Kahlenberg. He replied that, thanks to the care of the local doctors and staff, he began to feel much better. Astel had not seen the emperor so real and sincere for a long time. She thought that his whole image was a complete lie and arrogance. It seemed to her that he was always pretending and trying to seem friendly. In conversation, Kaiser was on equal terms with her and grandfather. He even asked where Theo was, because he was used to the boy always following the girl. She replied that he was playing with Pancake in the yard. And the emperor also told his grandfather that the little one was very funny and had a good upbringing. He suggests that the boy is very similar to his father. It's a pity that he is no longer alive. The elderly duke thanked the emperor for such warm words about his great-grandson. Theo is indeed a very good boy, and sometimes Kahlenberg learns good manners from him, and Astel looks after him very well. The emperor did not know the mother of this child at all. Therefore, he decided that it would be better for him not to touch upon the topic. This can be offensive to the woman. Perhaps she was an ordinary commoner. The old duke smiled sincerely. He said that he was even surprised that the emperor could be so caring and courteous. But he thought to himself that the Kaiser had treated his granddaughter terribly. Finally, Kahlenberg wished the emperor good luck in his personal life. The man reminded that every family has its own problems, and one should always refrain from hasty conclusions. The Kaiser thought to himself that he must have overestimated the former war hero a little. He said, and became, that he would give her huge lands and a large estate in the capital. Let her live there with the child and not need anything. He also plans to hire the best servants and the best teachers for Theo in the mansion for the girl. It will be much better for both her and the child. Astel realized that now the moment has come when she must fight for her rights. She told the emperor that she did not want to live in the capital. She doesn't like this city. It's too noisy here. But Kaiser seemed to simply ignore her words. He cleared his throat and said that in a few days the annual ball would be held at his castle. Astel is also invited, and he will be very happy to see her. There was no other choice than to bow deeply to the emperor and accept his strange invitation. The girl said that it would be an honor for her to attend such an event. Of course, she was lying. More than anything, she didn't want to be seen in public. No one noticed how little Theo entered the room and listened attentively to the conversation of the adults. Here, the boy joined the conversation and told the Kaiser that he also really wanted to go to the ball. He had never seen anything like this. He read about balls and various fairy tales. These are very beautiful events where all the people are dressed in their best clothes and the orchestra plays music, and all the men and women dance. Only this was not enough for poor Astel. She took the child in her arms and said that many such events awaited him ahead, but he is still too young to attend the ball. He will be bored there. Little Theo began to bargain. If he is not taken to the adult ball, then he can at least take a walk in the garden. This requires the permission of the emperor, because the evil uncle at the gate does not allow him there. The man breathed a sigh of relief and allowed the boy to go to the garden. He can stay there as long as he wants, and no one will interfere with him. He can even take a walk there with his mother, and the emperor will keep them company. Within a few minutes, the company went to the wonderful garden, which was laid out on the territory of the emperor's castle. The little one was truly delighted with the local beauty. In his grandfather's old house, there were only trees and rose bushes. In the middle of a beautiful pond, the boy saw a strange building. He asked Astel what kind of house this was. She explained that it was called a pavilion and was built so that one could admire the lake. The Kaiser saw the boy's interest in this structure and invited Theo to go inside the pavilion. It seemed that the boy was interested in absolutely everything here, and probably a whole month would not have been enough for him to examine everything here in detail. After looking around a little more, the boy decided that upon returning home, he and his mother would definitely plant a lot of flowers and various beautiful bushes in his grandfather's garden. He will also dig a pond and raise goldfish. The emperor listened to this whole conversation, so he said that if the girl liked any flowers from his garden, he could order the gardener to send them to Lady Astel's garden. After all, some specimens are only available in the Kaiser's garden. The girl thanked the man. She was pleased that the Kaiser even thought of such a thing. But it is unlikely that she will ask him for flowers to plant on the estate in the south of the empire. And the young emperor could not stop admiring the beauty of his ex-wife. Why didn't he notice before how smart, beautiful, and well-mannered she was? But soon there will be a ball in the palace. This is his only chance, and the Kaiser will not miss it. He decided that it was at the ball, in front of all high society, that he would formally ask Astel for permission to take care of little Theo. He fell in love with this boy as if he were his own son, and now he doesn't want to let him go anywhere. It was a very good day for the Kaiser. He spent so much time with Astel and her sweet nephew. In addition, he has planned a lot, and in the near future he will implement all his plans. In the evening, Astel decided to once again visit Duke Kalenberg's room. They talked a little, and the elderly man said that for the sake of his granddaughter, he was ready to endure any shame. The time will come, and everything will fall into place. Kalenberg understood perfectly well that apart from his granddaughter and her little child, he had absolutely no one. He lost 2 children and his grandson Sigmund. Therefore, he will fight to the end for the happiness of Theo and his mother. The old Duke was madly in love with this dear boy. Theo literally grew up in the arms of his great-grandfather, and Kalenberg took care of the baby as much as his strength and capabilities allowed. Therefore, he does not want the baby into the hands of the Emperor. Next, the old Duke asked if the girl knew why His Majesty, for no reason at all, suddenly decided to visit him. The Kaiser is not at all the kind of person who strictly follows etiquette. Is it possible that the manager has some ulterior motives? The Duke was an old and very wise man, so he understood perfectly well that his granddaughter still had feelings for the young emperor, and now the girl was again taking the Kaiser's side. She thought that, thanks to Kaiser, she would have a very good chance. She was invited to the ball, and there are always a lot of famous and influential people at this event. Therefore, His Majesty will not be able to refuse her request in public. But suddenly the girl remembered her angry father. He kicked her out of the house because the girl was deprived of the title of Empress. My father will probably also be present at the ball, and this thought makes me feel bad. But then, Astel promised herself, as well as her grandfather, that she would be completely fine, which is worth it to me. She is no longer the naive girl she was 6 years ago. Now she is able to stand up for herself and her loved ones. Grandfather tried to convey to Astel the fact that little Theo and the Emperor were very similar. If old Kalenberg noticed this, then other people who were in the castle also noticed. Therefore rumors may spread, and Theo better spend more time in the room. Astel herself knew very well that the Emperor and her son were like 2 peas in a pod. She has known Kaiser since childhood, and now he looks like a copy of the ruler in his youth. And then all I had to do was remember my father again. Duke Leston was a very smart and intelligent man. If he is at the ball and meets little Theo, he will definitely understand that the boy is the son of the Emperor. After all, Herza also knows Kaiser from a very young age. Old Duke Kalenberg also thought about this, but the Stella hastened to calm his grandfather. Under no circumstances will she allow little Theo to be taken to the capital. In addition, she forbade the boy to attend the ball. He will be at home with nannies. Meanwhile, Lady Florin went down to the dungeon to visit her sister Marianne. She was slightly disappointed with her sister's behavior, and the youngest was simply furious. Why did Florin decide to help her in this strange way? She promised that she would do everything to ensure that Marianne got out of prison as quickly as possible, and now he's forcing the girl to publicly apologize to that scum and commoner Astel Leston. No one has ever humiliated Marianne like this before. Florin sighed and smiled sadly. She reminded her sister that she was giving her a real chance to improve and clear her reputation. But due to her explosive nature, Marianne missed him. Therefore, let him only blame himself. But since Florin, in spite of everything, loved her sister, who said that she would try to find another way to save Marianne. In the meantime, she must remain calm and not rebel for any reason. She even bribed the guards in the dungeon so that, secretly from the boss, they could bring Marianne normal food and clean her cell. Otherwise, the girl will simply die of hunger in an absolute mess. But Marianne, out of her stupidity, simply did not believe her sister and refused to listen to her advice. The girl believed that Florin specifically did not want to help her because she was afraid that she would take away her place as the future empress. A maid, whom Florin had bribed, quietly entered Marianne's cell. The girl asked permission to leave and also brought the lady some food. Well, she grabbed her by the throat and threatened that she would kill the servant if she did not carry out her order. The next morning, Astel heard strange sounds in her chambers. She left the bedroom and was stunned with surprise. The entire living room was filled with a variety of gift boxes. Where does all this come from and why so much? The housekeeper appeared on the threshold and said that all these gifts were sent for His Majesty's lady. Mrs. must be present at the ball, so she just needs to choose what she likes from the gifts. To say that Astel was pleasantly surprised is to say nothing. It turns out that the emperor can be very polite and caring. He wants the girl at the ball to amaze everyone with her beauty. You will have to spend the whole day choosing an outfit. Theo also looked at all the gift boxes with interest. The boy expressed out loud the assumption that His Majesty really liked his aunt. Otherwise, he would not have sent so many beautiful things to her room. Astel even blushed a little from embarrassment. The girl asked the child not to talk about such nonsense anymore. The emperor is simply very polite and kind to his guests. But the boy objected. He said that men only send beautiful gifts to ladies they really like. In order not to create unnecessary problems for herself and the emperor, she asked the maid to play in the yard with Theo and the dog. Today, the boy is too talkative, and this can lead to unexpected problems. It is better that the servants do not hear such conversations. But on the other hand, it all looked very strange. The Kaiser really pays too much attention to her. And of course, everyone who lives in the castle sees this. Wrong rumors may spread. The day of the ball was approaching, and real chaos was happening in the emperor's residence. Everyone was preparing for the holiday, including Astel. She couldn't choose the right outfit for this day, so she tried on 100 beautiful dresses. So as not to get in the way, not to interfere with the servants, and not to ask unnecessary questions, the girl again asked the maid to take the boy to the garden. He really loved to walk there. Hannah, who was now always close to Mrs. Leston, suggested that little Theo was not at all like his father. Mr. Sigmund was a very calm and slow person, and Theo was too fast and active. Astel decided that after a while she would still have to tell Hannah the whole truth about Theo. She is next to the girl almost all the time. Living together, it will be difficult to hide the real color of the boy's eyes. The girls spent almost the whole day in the fitting room, but I didn't notice how quickly time flew by. She was alarmed that Theo had not yet returned from the garden. Why is he delayed? Hannah decided to send a maid for the boy. Perhaps the boy was playing with the dog and did not notice how time flew by. Now they will find him and bring him to the house. In addition, there is a dog with him and will not let the boy be offended. But a few minutes later, the maid ran into the house all in tears. She fell to her knees and began to ask the mistress for forgiveness. The girl said that she walked away from the boy for just a second because someone called her. It was at that moment that the little gentleman disappeared somewhere. Astel and Hannah simply froze at what they heard. Where could a small child go from the imperial garden? There are guards everywhere, and who could call a maid in that part of the estate where Theo plays? This is all very suspicious. Hannah volunteered to personally go to the garden and look for the child. Perhaps he was just playing somewhere in the bushes and didn't hear the servants calling him. But Astel said that it was necessary to raise all the inhabitants of the castle to their feet and find the child. Within a few minutes, dozens of people were running around the garden looking for the missing boy. But this did not give any result. It seemed as if someone had deliberately taken Theo from the garden. Astel's thoughts were pierced by a terrible guess. What if someone actually found out whose child Theo really is? What will happen then? Perhaps the boy was stolen and they will blackmail the emperor with this. The girls even decided to look at the pavilion on the lake. One of the maids said that she saw a little boy go inside and then accidentally knock over a ceramic vase. The child was probably afraid that he would be punished and ran away somewhere. Astel was in real panic. Why did Theo go so far? Why did you get into the pavilion? Perhaps he injured himself on the shards of a broken vase and now needs help. The angry girl turned to the maid. The pavilion is guarded. How and who allowed the boy to get inside? And where was the maid looking? How could she let a child into the pavilion where the jewels of the past emperor are located? The maid understood the seriousness of the situation and did not abdicate responsibility. She was with the boy all the time, but while he was playing, she decided to tidy up the room a little, and then someone called out to her. Despite the fact that the girl was crying and asking for forgiveness, Astel seemed too suspicious about this whole situation. But since the boy's whereabouts are not known at the moment, we should be more careful. Astel suggested leaving the conversation for later, and now starting to search for the missing child. When Theo is found, she wants to hear the versions of all the maids who saw her son in the garden. Some rustling was heard behind the trees, and a second later Emperor Lastiel appeared in the alley. An excited Theo sat in the man's arms and pressed tightly to Kaiser's chest. The emperor carefully examined those present and asked what happened here and why everyone was so excited. Astel replied that they had lost Theo, so she asked the servants to help her find the child. Next, the Kaiser moved his gaze to the broken porcelain vase. Why was it broken and who did it? The girl pointed to one of the maids and said that she saw Theo do this and then ran away. Hearing this, the boy became even more worried and started shouting that he didn't do it. Theo did not enter the pavilion because Astel forbade him to do so, and he didn't play near this building at all. He was on the other side. Things took a completely different turn. One of them was lying, or the maid. The emperor asked when the girl last saw the child. She replied that she did not remember the exact time. She began to cry even louder and assured everyone present that she was not to blame for anything. It was strange because no one had ever accused this maid of anything. The Kaiser looked at the girl menacingly and asked her to remember when exactly she saw it for the last time. Sobbing, the girl replied that it was about an hour ago. The matter became more and more confused. After thinking a little, Kaiser said that at that time the child was with him in the flower garden, which is located far from the pavilion. This means someone is interested in slandering little Theo and hiding their tracks. The boy immediately cheered up. He really wasn't guilty of anything. Theo said that he played with his majesty, and the emperor even saved him. The eyes shone with delight, and Astel asked what the Kaiser saved her nephew from. The happy boy asked the emperor for permission to tell the story himself. He was playing with the dog and did not notice how the maid had disappeared somewhere. Theo decided not to go anywhere, thinking that she would soon return for him. But after a while, a completely different aunt approached the boy. She said that Mrs. Astel sent her. She also has very tasty cookies. She offers to go and have tea with him. But then the dog jumped to his feet and began barking loudly. She growled at the stranger and tried to keep her away from the boy. Theo was even surprised why his pancake reacted like that. Suddenly the boy remembered how his mother warned him that while they were in this castle, he would meet many different strangers. But under no circumstances should he mindlessly follow strangers. It might be too dangerous. So the boy politely refused. He apologized and said that his aunt had forbidden him to go anywhere without her permission. Therefore, he will stay here and wait for his maid. Although the boy was small, he was distinguished by his intelligence. He immediately realized that this woman was dangerous. Plus, the dog reacts badly to it, so he decided to quickly run away. I don't know why, but he started crying. He was scared and offended that neither his mother nor the maid were nearby, and if it weren't for the dog, he would have been completely lost. The boy ran, not knowing where. It seemed to him that he had been running away from the stranger for an eternity. Suddenly, the boy and the dog came across the emperor. Kaiser didn't expect to see a child in this part of the garden, so he asked how Theo and the dog ended up here. He began to question the boy, and he, in tears, told the man that some stranger had tried to grab him. She invited him to go with her to eat cookies, but Dam began to bark and defend him. So they ran away. The emperor did not expect such a turn of events. Who wants to harm this child, and for what purpose? He knelt down and asked Theo to tell him everything in detail. You need to understand how to proceed. The Kaiser realized that if it weren't for this smart dog, big trouble could have happened. The boy ran for a long time, not making out the road, and if not for Dam, it would have been extremely difficult for him to get back to the castle. It was the dog that brought the boy back to the garden. Then, even unexpectedly for himself, the emperor hugged the boy tightly. He could hear Theo's heart pounding. The man felt very sorry for the child. He must have been very scared. Ateo, in turn, pressed himself tightly to the emperor's chest and listened to the measured beating of the man's heart. And it seemed to the boy that he was now in the safest place on earth. The emperor would never let him offend. Theo did not stop crying, and the emperor continued to console the boy. Everything is fine now. There is absolutely nothing more to be afraid of. No one would dare touch the boy next to him. He won't allow it. When the child calmed down a little, the emperor decided it was time to go home. First, you need to find Astel, because she probably isn't worried. The emperor promised the boy one of these days to take him to the zoo, and then to the puppet theater. Having made plans for the whole next week, Theo the emperor and their faithful companion Pancake set off in search of Lady Astel. Now they will probably have to calm her down. and of course the emperor will do this. The man warned the boy not to tell his aunt about what they were now discussing and planning. If she found out that they agreed on something without her knowledge, she would definitely be angry. The boy remembered his mother, who asked her to keep it a secret from his eyes. And then I remembered my grandfather, who said that you shouldn't tell anyone the secret that Astel is his mother. Adults have so many strange secrets. The boy had wanted to take the emperor's hand for a very long time and felt that now was the moment. To his great surprise, the emperor did not take his hand away, but rather squeezed Theo's palm tighter. They headed towards the castle. Now the Kaiser wanted to understand the situation and find the culprit. Therefore, the emperor gathered near the pavilion all the servants who worked in the garden and the maids who looked after the boy. Half an hour later, all the servants, who had no alibi at the time of the boy's disappearance, were already standing in the garden and waiting for a conversation with the emperor. The Kaiser did not intend to drag out this matter and wanted to quickly find the culprit. He called Theo and Astel over to him, and then asked the boy to look at the assembled servants. Will Theo be able to recognize the maid who tried to catch him and from whom he ran away? After looking at all the staff for a bit, Theo frowned seriously. Then the boy raised his finger and pointed at one of the maids. She was clearly nervous and didn't know where to put her eyes. And I asked the child again if he was sure that it was exactly that. That auntie, but the child replied that he could not make a mistake. And if they don't believe him, then let them bring a dog to this stranger. The young girl started screaming and crying. She said that all this was slander and the young gentleman made a mistake. She didn't even go out into the garden today. The emperor's assistant noted that the boy alone would not be enough to punish. Then the emperor asked the girl to show her the sleeves of her blouse. Theo said that the dog bit the stranger on the hand. This means that the sleeve on the clothing must be damaged. There should be a trace of teeth left on it. The girl immediately ran up to the emperor and showed the sleeves of her blouse. The clothes were really intact and neat, but Astel still considered this girl suspicious. She came closer and asked the maid to show the hem of her skirt. She was immediately surprised and asked why Mrs. Astel needed this. It is already clear that she is not to blame for anything. But the girl insisted on her way, and the maid had to show the hem of her clothes. It was white, clean, and starched. From this, Astel concluded that the girl had recently changed clothes. Then she explained her train of thought to everyone. For servants who work around the house or in the garden all day, the hem of their skirts becomes dirty after just a few hours. This same girl has all her clothes absolutely clean, but this simply cannot happen. This means she managed to change clothes and is now lying. The stranger again began to object and tried to convince everyone that she was simply wearing her clothes carefully and did not have time to get them dirty. Then Astel suggested that the guards could immediately check the servants' room without any problems. Maybe there will be a dirty dress with torn ones. The maid uniform is what the girls wear in the palace. The ruler takes care of it at home and keeps an accurate count. If you check the ledger, you can find out how many clothes were assigned to this maid. After such words from Astel, the maid fell to her knees and began to ask for forgiveness. She said that she was not to blame for anything. She just wanted to hide the fact that she broke expensive ceramics. The girl was simply afraid of going to jail. Astel was amazed at the girl's answer. Doesn't she really feel sorry for the innocent child whom she so vilely set up? Or in the capital, all the people are just as cruel and callous. They are ready to do anything to hide their guilt. The emperor was simply ashamed of the behavior of his servants. He was not going to forgive such behavior. Therefore, the man ordered the guards to take the maid to prison. Let her sit and think about what she did. When the guards took the clueless maid away, Theo calmed down a little and was terribly glad that he was again close to his mother and Hannah. Astel asked the girl to take the boy back to the house and take care of him. Everyone slowly left the lawn to go about their business. Hannah had long since taken Theo inside the castle. The emperor was left alone with his ex-wife. There was some awkward silence. A few minutes later, Astel finally came to her senses and began to thank His Majesty for finding and bringing Theo back. She was very worried for his life, that someone had harmed him. The man replied that there was no need for gratitude. This is what every normal person would do. Astel also needs to calm down and come to her senses. Her day today turned out to be too emotional. But the girl knew that she needed to thank the emperor. If he had not figured everything out, the boy would have been accused of breaking the ancient vase, and something terrible could happen to him. Astel went to her room, but her thoughts were restless. The story with the vase couldn't get out of my head. It seems that the story with the vase was a ready-made plan in case of an unsuccessful attempt to steal the child. Two people may be behind this incident, or maybe this plan is the result of cooperation between them. In any case, she will not leave this mysterious case just like that, and will figure it out. In the room, little Theo once again told in detail and with emotion how His Majesty saved Pancake and himself from the criminal. The boy was completely delighted with the Emperor and said that when he grew up, he would also become a ruler. When Astel was about to go down to the dining room to feed Theo, the butler appeared at the door and said that the Emperor had sent many gifts for the little gentleman. There were so many gift boxes that several servants carried them into the room. The boy couldn't believe his eyes. He had never seen so many beautiful and colorful things in his life, and the Emperor prepared all this just for him. The next morning was emotionally difficult for Astel. She spent a long time dressing up and changing dresses. It was important for her to look perfect today. The fact is that she invited Lady Florine Crouch to her place for tea. Lady Florine arrived on time and was already waiting for Astel in the living room. The girl was younger than Astel and also looked great. They met and greeted each other. So far, the atmosphere was slightly tense. Already over tea, Lady Florine admitted that she had long been looking for a reason to meet, but was slightly surprised that Astel had sent her a letter of invitation. Perhaps something happened, or does Florine need some help? And at that moment, Astel stopped being kind. The expression on her face changed dramatically, and the girl said that yesterday someone had brazenly tried to kidnap her little nephew Theo, and she wants to find the culprit. Lady Florine's face changed, and she expressed sincere sympathy on this matter, but she hopes that everything is fine with the boy now. Astel confirmed and said that the Emperor sent the boy a bunch of sweets and gifts. They started drinking tea. Florine brought her sweets, which she personally prepared, and then the girl said that she was sincerely sorry. It seemed to her that her sister Marianne had become a little wiser and repented of what she had done, but no. But Astel decided to ask everything directly. How about Lady Florine herself? She is now sitting at the table with the girl who put her sister in prison. What can she say about this? This must be difficult and unpleasant. Florine smiled sadly and replied that Marianne herself was to blame for being behind bars. It seems that her older sister did not like that His Majesty favored Astel. Mariana loves him very much. The girl replied that Marianne was in vain to worry so much about this. Astel has no desire to regain the title of Empress. She had long ago realized that it was foolish to pursue such things. Florine smiled again and replied that then everything suited her. There can be no enmity between them now. On the contrary, she is pleased by the fact that His Majesty paid attention not to someone else, but to Astel. The conversation became more and more mysterious. That is, Astel at that moment was convenient for Florine because she was not considered a competitor for the right to take the Emperor's heart. This is exactly what it looked like from the outside. But Astel was far from a stupid girl. She knew how to read between the lines and guess the real thoughts and motives of the people around her. If Florine had been so calm, she would not have come to the capital to check the situation. Astel looked at the girl carefully again. This is her real face. Lady Florine will never do anything just like that. She came to make sure that Astel really did not claim the throne of the Empress again. Lady Florine, in turn, thought that 6 years ago no one would have thought that she would now be in the Emperor's castle. It was quite logical on her part to personally check the relationship between the Kaiser and his ex-wife. The rumored girl said that she was really very glad to meet Lady Astel, and her desire to apologize to the Emperor's ex-wife was completely sincere. To be honest, she had admired this girl for a long time. The Emperor's ex-wife tried to calm the girl down. In any case, Lady Florine herself sees that His Majesty has absolutely no affection for Astel. Therefore, ne Florine nor her sister Marianne should not worry about this. Now, the Emperor does not have feelings for her called love. He is not at all familiar with this feeling and this word. According to the girl, this is a simple feeling of guilt for past actions, and absolutely nothing more. Lady Florine nodded and said that she trusted the words of the Emperor's ex-wife, but they calmed her down a little. Therefore, now she thanks for the meeting and delicious tea, and wants to take her leave. When Lady Florine left, she sighed heavily. This conversation was difficult. This is not how she imagined meeting this girl. The young Duchess is very cunning and perspicacious, so you must always be on your guard. But what Astel wanted to know, she found out. Lady Florine certainly did not set up the situation with Theo's kidnapping. The incident has nothing to do with her. Florine is clearly incapable of creating such a weak trap. One thing became clear. The criminals who wanted to kidnap Theo could only be one person. This is definitely Lady Marianne. Now knowing the identity of this person and became definitely must repay him. First you need to survive the ball. Meanwhile, Florin was already questioning the maid from the palace, whom she managed to bribe. The woman had to find out absolutely all the information about the former empress, but there were no strange facts in her biography. But one thing seemed very strange to the maid. This information was told to her by a maid who works in the emperor's castle. While near the door to Theo's room, the woman heard the boy calling Astel Mom. At first, Lady Florin did not pay any attention to these words. There is absolutely nothing strange here. As a child, she also called her Aunt Mom. Children do this often. Besides, Theo is an orphan. But everything needed to be double-checked. Therefore, Lady Florin set the woman the following task. The maid must find out everything about the birth and origins of the boy Theo. Why did he end up being fostered by Astel? The day of the long-awaited ball has arrived. Astel looked simply amazing, so all the guests' eyes were focused on her. Everyone was interested in looking at the emperor's ex-wife, who had disappeared somewhere for 6 whole years. On the threshold, the girl was met by Lady Florin. She greeted politely and even bowed. The girl was glad to meet her new friend again. They exchanged mutual compliments and decided to enter the hall with the guests. Florin knew what she was doing. It was clear that all the eyes of the aristocrats at the ball would be focused on the emperor's ex-wife. Therefore, she followed Astel all the time so that the public would not let her out of sight either. I myself began to feel a little strange and uncomfortable at this holiday. She was used to the public and knew how to behave in such a society. But the girls lacked support. With her eyes, she constantly looked for Kaiser among the people. Is he really not coming? Suddenly, a stranger approached the girl. He was very good-looking. The guy said hello and asked if she was Mrs. Astel Leston. The girl carefully examined the guest and nodded in approval. Then she asked the guy to introduce himself, and within a second she learned that his name was Serbel von Eklund. The young man is the commander of the Ranberg Knights. Astel remembered how important the Ranberg Knightly Division was for the Empire. But what does the commander of the Knights do at the ball? The guy explained that before heading north, he came to the Emperor to make a report. And I became a little surprised. Has there really been some trouble in the north again? But the young man calmed her down. It's just that there was an uprising in that area recently, so they are patrolling these areas. The girl became interested in the fact that the knight's boss came up to her and started a conversation. He replied that his father asked him to convey his greetings to Duke Kalenberg. He learned that grandfather Astel was here. She did not know that the old duke knew the father of the head of the knightly division, but Astel promised to definitely say hello to her grandfather. Perhaps he will tell you what connects him with this person. The head of the Imperial Guard, Sir Linden, approached the young people. The young man was especially handsome today. He politely greeted and asked if Astel already knew Sir Serbel. It turned out that these 2 young people are old friends. They have something to chat about, discuss news. Astel decided to ask the chief of security if he had seen the emperor. He replied that His Majesty was upstairs. The girl automatically looked up. The Kaiser stood near the railing. To say that he was irresistible that evening would be an understatement. The man carefully watched the guests who were gradually gathering in the hall. Nice music started playing. The orchestra unobtrusively invited the guests to dance. Sir Linden took his leave because today he came to the ball with his beloved, who was probably already waiting for him. The couples began to dance. Sorbel again approached Astel and invited her to dance. He appeared at the ball himself, saw that the girl was also alone, and felt slightly uncomfortable. That's why he suggested that she stick together. The girl's position turned out to be difficult. Firstly, the emperor himself looked down on them. Secondly, why does this young man invite her? Because there are so many young girls around, and he knows that Astel is Kaiser's ex-wife. And she didn't want to dance with Sorbel. This will only attract unnecessary attention to the girl. Footsteps were heard from behind, and the guy bowed sharply. It turned out that Emperor Lastiel was standing behind Astel. And everything miraculously resolved itself. The emperor came closer to the girl and extended his hand to her. Then he asked her to share her first dance with him. Sorbel immediately stepped aside. But the emperor was unlucky. Astel said that she must refuse His Majesty. She's very ashamed to admit it, but she hasn't danced for so long that she's now afraid of trampling on a man's feet and becoming the laughing stock of the evening. But the Kaiser did not think of giving up. He said that he does not accept refusals at all, never for anything. Therefore, he still hopes that the girl will change her mind. Besides, They had danced together many times before, so Astel will quickly remember everything. And after a few minutes they were dancing. Everything happened in silence, and each of them thought about his own. Astel recalled the old days. She was so happy when the young Kaiser asked her to dance. Now everything is different. Once upon a time, she spent hours on end in the dance hall. The girl had to match the young crown prince, so she honed every move, learned to hear the music and her partner. And she did all this only for one man, the young crown prince Kaiser. She was madly in love with this young man, and he just treated her well. The guy never talked about love, he was just always there. But as far as Astel remembers, the Kaiser never liked such holidays. He didn't like to dance at all and only did it because of his status. Why now was he the first to come up and ask her to dance? Perhaps in this unique way he wanted to support the girl. Everyone is looking at her anyway, she feels uncomfortable. Or maybe he was jealous of the young chief of the knightly guard, so he approached her and offered to dance. Previously, the girl went out of her way to hear such words from the crown prince. She dreamed that she would dance only with him all her life, but everything turned out differently, and now her heart is just jumping out of her chest with excitement. The girl was 100% sure that now all the attention of the public in the hall was focused on her and the emperor. Therefore, there is no need to wait and doubt. This is the best moment to make your plans come true. And in an instant, the girl fell to her knees right in front of the emperor. She began to cry, her voice trembling. Astel said that her grandfather, Duke of Kallenberg, is feeling very unwell. And all this is because of her. He got sick because of her. Therefore, she now does not ask, but even begs the emperor to allow the old duke to take her nephew Theo and go to her estate in the south of the country. It will be much better for an elderly person there. From the outside, this picture looked simply great. The poor girl knelt before the ruler, and everyone watched, waiting for the emperor's answer. Of course, he must allow the duke to return home. After a minute of silence, in the complete silence of the hall, the emperor loudly and clearly said that he did not allow Kallenberg to leave the capital. Not now. But perhaps they will return to this conversation a little later. Astel began to pour out arguments, saying that the boy needed a suitable climate because he had recently suffered from a fever, and Grandpa really misses his home. Here he just sits in the room and doesn't go anywhere. But the Kaiser was relentless. He asked the girl to stop crying and pull herself together. He forbids her, Duke Kallenberg and little Theo, from leaving his castle. And he has reasons for this, but they will talk about them after the ball. The emperor's words were quite harsh. Astel no longer remembered when the man spoke to her in such a tone. His eyes were cold and his gaze unreadable. Maybe she went a little overboard? There was a moment of general awkward silence. Astel continued to kneel. But then the emperor said that the ball must continue, and the guests began to fuss a little and began to whisper. The emperor did not say another word. He simply turned around and left the hall without ever looking back. Astel put him in an extremely awkward position. He did not expect this from her. Maybe she is taking revenge for a past insult. Astel's mood deteriorated terribly. Now she believed that she had acted very rudely towards the emperor. It is clear that he was offended. No other reaction should have been expected. All the guests present at the ball were sure that the emperor would allow Grandfather Astel to leave the capital, but the Kaiser himself thought differently. The man surprised everyone with his cruelty. But the biggest strange thing was that for some reason Kaiser's eyes were very sad at the moment of refusal. It seemed that the man regretted refusing the girl. Something was wrong here. Near the castle there grew a beautiful acacia tree, which was just blooming at that time. The girl decided to come up and admire the flowers, and suddenly near the tree I saw the silhouette of a man. The emperor stood there. The man asked the girl to talk a little. He was sure that Astel came to the ball only for the reason of publicly asking the emperor to take his grandfather and nephew away from the capital. But there was nothing left to do but admit the fact that the emperor was absolutely right. She really did it because of her grandfather and nephew, but she doesn't understand why the emperor refused her. The Kaiser replied that the girl's eagerness to get rid of her nephew and grandfather seemed a little strange to him, and he decided to figure it all out first. And I decided to answer the question with a question. Firstly, she asked why the emperor needed the old Duke of Kallenberg in the capital. And secondly, why does he need her nephew Theo? Then the man asked why Astel didn't openly say that she didn't like balls and that she wouldn't come there. and for a long time it was possible to ask the emperor to take his grandfather and nephew to the south. Why was there all this circus? Now Astel was fully aware of her mistake. She acted terribly ugly towards the emperor. If she had talked to him earlier and not in public, then now the man would not feel so trampled. In fact, the emperor understood perfectly well that the girl would no longer be able to live without her nephew. And if he sends Duke Kalenberg and Theo to the south, then Astel will definitely go after them, and he will be left alone again. And he doesn't want to lose this girl anymore. He fully realized that 6 years ago he made a huge mistake, and now he asks Astel not to leave him anymore and to stay in the capital with his grandfather and nephew. She stood there with her eyes wide open and couldn't believe what she had just heard. The Kaiser could not say such words. She probably misunderstood everything. Does he really want her to stick around? But she doesn't want to repeat this mistake again. She doesn't want to be judged by the local elite. She doesn't want to be near His Majesty anymore. 6 years ago, it all ended. Nothing else needs to change. 6 years ago, when I heard about Kaiser's plans to divorce, I just wanted to die, but she didn't, because the emperor would become in the eyes of people a cold-blooded man who killed his wife immediately after the wedding. Then she simply left and experienced all her pain and humiliation from society completely alone. Although it looked stupid, she really loved Kaiser at that time. But this does not mean that I suffered. And now, with tears in her eyes, the girl told the emperor that there are things in the world that cannot be fixed. Everything was over for the two of them. And if Kaiser had nothing more to say, then she would like to end their conversation with this. The emperor was left alone under the acacia tree. He covered his face with his hands and exhaled noisily. He expected me to have such a conversation. I needed to calm down and think about what to do next. He never wanted to lose his ex-wife. Meanwhile, Astel's father, Duke of Leston, was preparing a vile plan against the emperor. He wanted to organize a rebellion while His Majesty was in the castle of the Dench residence. He thought that if information about the rebellion leaked to the masses, the emperor would sit in that remote castle and not dare to act. But everything happened faster Duke Leston expected. The man already knew that the Duke of Seat was a spy. He was specially recruited only so that he could convey false information to Emperor Kaiser. His Majesty might have thought that he had cunningly confused their plans and left the capital. However, the imperial palace was not a fortress for him. This meant that the emperor's departure from the palace would only play into their hands. The man was waiting for that moment to see who would really emerge victorious in this situation. If the opportunity presents itself, then while staying at the Dench residence, you need to suddenly attack the emperor. But Leston's assistant reported that the emperor was not himself at the Dench residence. Along with His Majesty, the old Duke of Kalenberg and the Duchess of Leston are also there. But the Duke said that he should not pay attention to his traitorous daughter. For the sake of his only dream of becoming a regent, the Duke of Leston once took a girl of impeccable blood as his wife. But she bore him a daughter who grew up ungrateful and stubborn. He should have sent Astel somewhere abroad, or sold it to another decent aristocrat immediately after his divorce from the emperor. And his daughter had already broken off any relationship with him a long time ago. So if something happens, you can kill her along with the emperor and this strange little boy. The Duke of Leston did not care at all about the life of his daughter. The old Duke of Kalenberg had been trying for several days to get an audience with the emperor, but His Majesty constantly rejected the man's visit. He probably didn't want to hear the old man's request to send him and his great-grandson home to the south. Having heard from the conversations of adults that they were not going to go to the capital, the little one was very upset. He was already dreaming of how he would spend time with the emperor in his main palace. In addition, the Iser promised to take him to the zoo and theater. The boy asked his mother to explain to him why she and her grandfather did not want to leave for the main city of the empire, and she answered that the capital was very far away and there was nothing good there for the little boy. In order to somehow distract the child from unnecessary thoughts, the girl suggested that Duke Kalenberg and little Theo have a picnic in the forest near the estate. This will diffuse the situation a little and help you concentrate on the necessary details. The forest near this area was used as a hunting ground for the emperor, but if she warns in advance that she wants to have a picnic there shouldn't be any problems. People rarely go there, which means it will be possible to stock up on the necessary herbs. Astel found His Majesty's secretary and asked him to tell the emperor that she was asking permission to take a walk with the child in the nearby forest and have a small picnic there. He cannot refuse her such a small thing. But it turned out that the emperor was not in the castle. He went hunting in the northern lands. After the ball he was not himself and worked for days. Therefore, in order to somehow dispel the man, the secretary organized a hunt for him. Secretary Cloudbellion was very insightful, and now he was not going to resist meeting these two in the forest. If this continues, the emperor's feelings will only intensify. But on the other hand, the guy understood that the emperor and Astel would eventually have to sort things out someday, so why not do it during a picnic? They will meet there by chance, and maybe they will decide everything. The guy told the assistant to tell Lady Astel that she had received permission to picnic in the forest. But Bellion strictly forbade the man to tell the girl that the emperor was there. In order not to postpone the event, the next day old Kalenberg, accompanied by his granddaughter and great-grandson, went to the forest for a picnic. Everyone was in a great mood. Theo was especially happy.